Archers fired blindly into the dense crowd below, their arrows falling like locusts, claiming lives despite the shields. From a second-floor platform, Oliver hurled Molotov cocktails, targeting the ladders and the base of the wall. Crash! Whoosh! The bottles shattered, drenching the area in sticky, flammable oil that ignited instantly. Several ladders became roaring torches, forcing the climbing Solan soldiers to jump or perish in the flames. A sea of fire formed at the wall's base, the heat and smoke stalling the offensive. The eastern wall became a meat grinder, with both sides locked in a brutal, life-for-life exchange. Every second brought fresh casualties, the air thick with the stench of blood and fire. Faced with such stubborn resistance and the wall of fire, the Solan soldiers could not break through. Their initial fanaticism waned, replaced by fear and hesitation as casualties mounted and the fire proved insurmountable. Poke watched with a grim expression, frustrated by the effectiveness of the Molotov cocktails against his unprotected troops. He glanced west, where Old Barton's men were still bogged down in a stalemate against the remaining outposts. Useless, Poke cursed. If Old Barton had pushed from the west, it would have diverted fire and eased the pressure on his own front. Relying on the cowardly old man was futile. Poke scanned the fortress for another way in. The fortress was an irregular structure built around the original lord's house, with uneven walls and varying heights. He spotted a corner on the southeast side where the wall was lower, hastily patched with wood and lightly defended. There, Poke decided. He gathered 30 to 40 men, including another knight. We flank them and attack the low wall, he ordered, signaling the frontline troops to maintain their assault as a distraction. They moved under the cover of ruins toward the southeast corner. As expected, the defense there was thin, with only a few nervous Conford soldiers watching. We have no ladders. What now? A soldier asked. Human ladder. Quickly, Poke commanded. Strong soldiers crouched against the wall, hands locked to form a step. Poke nodded to the knight. The knight took a running start, stepped into the soldier's hands, and was hoisted upward. With a leap, he grabbed the wall's edge, pulled himself up, and vaulted over like a cat, landing inside. There inside, a Conford soldier cried out. The knight rolled forward, steadying himself on the ground within the fortress. Before he could assess his surroundings, a threat emerged. Kill! A Conford spearman roared, thrusting his spear toward the knight's chest. The attack was sudden. The knight, still unbalanced, could only attempt a desperate parry with his sword. Clang! The spear's force overwhelmed his hasty defense. The spear tip grazed his chainmail, leaving a deep scratch and sending sparks flying. The impact numbed his arm and sent him crashing to the ground. The spearman prepared to deliver a killing blow. At that critical moment, I leaped over the wall, my sword raised high. I dove directly at the spearman to save my comrade. The spearman reacted instantly, abandoning the downed knight to twist his body and sweep his spear toward me. Clang! The spear's shaft blocked my strike, sparks showering as the impact cracked the spearman's grip and sent him stumbling back. I also landed unsteadily, struggling to find my footing. The skirmish happened in a flash. By the time the other defenders reacted, both Solan knights had established a foothold inside the walls. More Solan soldiers were scaling the low walls using human ladders or their comrades' shoulders, scrambling into the fort. Flank! They've breached the flank. Cries of alarm erupted inside the fortification. Oliver, commanding from the east wall, heard the commotion. He turned to see a Solan soldier leaping over the southeast wall into the fort. Damn it! They've broken through. Oliver's eyes flashed with fury. He roared at his reserve militia squad leaders. Take your men. Drive those Solonians out and seal the breach. Move. Yes, sir. Follow me. A scarred sergeant led a dozen men, charging toward the chaos at the southeast wall. Oliver's heart hammered. If the enemy established a foothold, the entire defensive system would collapse under a pincer attack, even for his elite militia. He glanced at the Solan Knight commander outside, who watched with a cold, triumphant smirk. Oliver glared at the knight, his rage boiling over. Bastard! He grabbed an unlit Molotov cocktail and hurled it toward Poke. The distance was too great for a desperate throw. The bottle landed harmlessly in the open field far from Poke. It shattered, spilling oil, but without a flame, it posed no threat. Poke sneered, mocking what he perceived as the panicked, irrational behavior of a desperate commander. Yet, the unlit bottle had an unintended effect. It smashed into sullen soldiers just climbing the wall. The sudden crash and splashing oil startled them, causing them to pause in confusion, fearing a new incendiary weapon. The scarred sergeant seized this momentary hesitation. "Kill them! Drive them out!" he bellowed. His dozen men charged the Solonians with disciplined formation. These were not the panicked laborers the Solonians had faced before. These were Oliver's core militia, trained for 5 grueling months by me, the one-legged devil. I had demanded standards of fitness, skill, and coordination equal to a main legion. The men of Fort Number 3 had cursed their harsh instructor for months. Now, in the heat of battle, my devilish training became their lifeline. "Form up. Second combat formation," the sergeant barked. In a heartbeat, the men shifted into 2 compact, efficient Mandarin duck formations. The invading Solonians, including 2 knights, were Poke's elite, brave, and experienced. They roared and charged the militia. The 2 sides clashed in the narrow space. The Solonians soon felt a crushing sense of powerlessness. The Mandarin duck formation was devastating against individualistic, uncoordinated warriors. The Solon Knights and their guards were exactly that. In a one-on-one duel, the Knights would easily dominate. But they couldn't even get close. Each formation was anchored by a shield bearer, holding a hide-covered shield and a short blade. The shield bearer's only task was defense. They didn't even draw their blades. A knight struck a shield bearer with a heavy sword blow. The shield bearer caught the blow with his shield, the impact vibrating through the knight's arm. The knight tried to find an opening, but the shield bearer adjusted his angle perfectly, denying him any gap. If the shield bearers had attacked, the knights could have exploited their openings. Instead, the militia remained immovable, frustrating the Solonians who relied on individual prowess. The real threat lay behind the shield bearers. 2 pikemen followed each shield bearer, darting their spears out like vipers from around the shield. The spear tips flashed, forcing the Solonians to dodge and creating chaos. A Solonian dodged one spear only to be forced back by another, losing his footing. At the rear of the formation stood a soldier with a tongpa, a trident-like weapon. Its head featured 3 forward-pointing prongs. A knight tried to hack through a shield, but his sword struck the tongpa. With a screech of metal, the knight's blade was caught between the prongs, stuck fast. As the knight struggled, a pikeman lunged, driving his spear into the knight's exposed chest. The spear pierced the chainmail, and the knight collapsed with a cry. The surrounding Solonians recoiled in horror at this suffocating fighting style. Individual skill was useless against such tight, specialized coordination. They were like beasts trapped in thorns, unable to strike the source of their wounds. "Don't panic. Spread out. Attack from the flanks," the surviving knight shouted, trying to break the formation. But in the cramped, chaotic confines of the fort, such tactical adjustments were nearly impossible. The scarred sergeant ordered his men to push the Solon soldiers back against the wall. 2 small Mandarin duck formations advanced, their shields and spears forcing the Solon soldiers back toward the low wall they had breached. Despite being outnumbered and outmatched, the Conford militia's disciplined formation and resolve drove the elite Solon soldiers into a retreat. Oliver, watching from the east wall, felt a brief sense of relief, quickly replaced by deep concern. The flank was stabilized, but the front remained under immense pressure, and the Solon commander was far from finished. A dark figure vaulted over the wall, Poke. His movements were swift and lethal, unlike the soldiers before him. Poke immediately identified the tongpa bearer as the linchpin of the turtle formation and targeted him for elimination. Landing, Poke lunged forward, his blood-stained scimitar arcing toward the tongpa bearer. The tongpa bearer tried to recover, but Poke was too fast. Squelch. The scimitar pierced the gap in the tongpa bearer's armor, sinking to the hilt. The tongpa bearer collapsed, his weapon clattering to the ground as he died. A nearby spearman, enraged by his comrade's death, thrust his spear at Poke's chest. It was a powerful, well-trained strike. Poke, mid-recovery, relied on his combat instincts. He twisted his body, letting the spear tip graze his chainmail, sparking against the metal. The spearman retracted his weapon to prepare for a second strike. This was a standard technique to build momentum. Poke denied him the chance, reaching for a throwing axe at his waist. He hurled it at the spearman's face with all his might. The axe whistled through the air. The spearman, caught off balance, could only raise his spear's shaft to deflect it. Clang! The axe hit the shaft, numbing the spearman's hand and knocking the weapon aside. The spearman lost his reach and his defensive posture. Poke seized the opening. He lunged forward, closing the distance in 2 steps. Within arm's reach, the spear became a liability for the militia soldier. Poke slashed upward with his scimitar. The blade sliced the spearman's throat. He fell, spraying blood onto Poke's face. Ignoring the blood, Poke turned his cold gaze toward the scarred sergeant. With the Tongpa bearer and spearman dead, the formation crumbled. The surrounding Solan soldiers roared in triumph. Kill them! Avenge our brothers! Inspired by their commander's prowess, the Solan soldiers surged forward, reversing the tide of battle. The Conford militia, stripped of their formation, were quickly overwhelmed. In close quarters, length became a disadvantage. The spears, once lethal, were now too cumbersome for the chaotic melee. Back to back. Hold them! The scarred sergeant screamed, trying to reform the line. It was too late. Poke cut down the exposed spearmen one by one. The Solan soldiers swarmed them, using shields and bodies to negate the reach of the spears. Cries of pain filled the air. The isolated spearmen could not defend against the onslaught. One was struck by a battle axe while distracted. Another had his spearhead severed by Poke before being killed. Within moments, the militia support was decimated, leaving only the scarred sergeant and a few wounded men against the wall. Poke sneered, locking eyes with the scarred sergeant. Your men are dead. Join them. Poke growled, attacking. The sergeant fought back with desperate courage, but he was no match for Poke's superior skill. After a few exchanges, Poke found a gap and slashed the sergeant's sword arm. The sergeant cried out, his weapon dropping as his arm was deeply gashed. Poke prepared to deliver the killing blow to the sergeant's neck. Suddenly, a sound pierced the air. A black projectile streaked from the fortress toward Poke's temple. Poke's instincts flared with a warning of lethal danger. He abandoned his attack, instinctively raising his scimitar to block the incoming strike. Clang! A heavy armor-piercing arrow slammed into my scimitar with a deafening crash, denting the steel and sending sparks flying. The immense force numbed my arm, split my thumb web, and caused the heavy blade to recoil, slamming into my own cheek. Bang! My vision darkened, my ears ringing as if bells were tolling inside my skull. I stumbled back, barely staying upright, my face swelling rapidly as blood trickled from my mouth. I had survived the shot, but at a heavy price. The Solan soldiers surrounding the scarred sergeant were less fortunate. Thwip! Art! As I was struck, more arrows flew from the same direction, piercing the Solan soldiers who were still distracted by their slaughter. Caught off guard, they were struck in the throat and chest, collapsing instantly. In a blink, 3 or 4 Solan soldiers fell. The rest scrambled for shields and cover, their momentum halted. I shook my throbbing head, spat out blood, and wiped my eyes to focus. A group of men stood in the open space leading to the main building. At the front stood the Conford commander, Oliver, gripping a spear. Behind him were several cold-eyed archers and a dozen resolute spearmen. They had formed a defensive line blocking the path to the fortress core. Seeing their small numbers, I wiped my bloody mouth and grinned grimly. Finally decided to come out? I rasped. I see this is your last stand. Without further words, the final battle began. Kill! Oliver roared, his voice raw with desperate madness. The remaining Conford militia abandoned their Mandarin duck formation and charged like a flood, spears and swords leveled. They knew their only hope was to close the distance and force a melee to negate the enemy's ranged weapons. I, intending to use my own ranged weapons, was caught off guard by the commander's suicidal charge. Fine, let's have a slaughter. I roared, gripping my dented scimitar. Solan warriors, crush them. Kill. Both sides collided in a violent clash of steel and fury. The sounds of battle, clashing blades, tearing flesh, and dying screams, echoed through Grey Wolf Valley. Oliver led the charge, his injured leg crudely splinted with wooden boards and cloth. It was a desperate measure that provided temporary support at the cost of agonizing pain and further damage. Ignoring the pain, Oliver focused solely on killing the Solon commander. He lunged toward me with a limping, predatory gait. Having targeted the commander who nearly killed me, met his charge. I swung my scimitar in a powerful arc, aiming to cleave Oliver in two. Oliver, experienced in combat, read the strike instantly. He ducked, letting the blade whistle inches above his head. Simultaneously, he thrust his spear toward my exposed midsection. Thud! The spear pierced leather and muscle, but I twisted, causing the tip to strike a nearby Solon soldier instead. Oliver pushed forward with all his might, driving the spear through the man. The soldier shrieked as he was shoved backward. He was slammed against the wall, the spear pinning him there like a specimen. The soldier convulsed, blood and viscera spilling as he clawed uselessly at the shaft. Ignoring the dying man, Oliver released the stuck spear. He drew his arming sword and spun, swinging a crescent arc of steel behind him. His veteran instincts had sensed me moving in to strike his exposed back. The counterattack was perfectly timed. I, caught off guard by the sudden reversal, was forced to retreat. I blocked the strike, my own attack ruined. Clang! Sparks flew as I parried, but the momentum shifted to Oliver. Oliver completed his turn, now facing me directly. With cold resolve, he launched a relentless barrage of thrusts and slashes, giving me no room to breathe. I roared, parrying the blows as the two locked into a desperate duel. Scimitars and longswords clashed, sparks flying as steel met steel. Amidst the chaotic battlefield, the two locked in a fierce duel. Oliver's swordplay was concise, lethal, and rhythmic, reflecting expert training. Poke's style was wild and powerful, characteristic of a veteran cavalryman. Around them, soldiers engaged in brutal, close-quarters skirmishes. Every man fought with desperate intensity, trading strikes and dodging fatal blows. Men fell constantly, turning the ground into a bloody, primitive meat grinder. During the exchange, Poke noticed a flaw. Oliver was skilled, but his left leg was stiff, causing a slight hesitation in his movement. He's a cripple, Poke realized, shocked. A man with a damaged leg was holding his own against a seasoned Solon knight. It was incomprehensible. Poke didn't know that Oliver had learned from the late Master Andre during the siege of Confort. Oliver had humbly sought guidance from the master after the night raids. Though Andre fell, his teachings on footwork and rhythm took root in Oliver. These techniques allowed the aging, injured veteran to fight far above his physical limits. At Grey Wolf Valley, Oliver poured his life's learning into this final stand. He ignored his pain and the overwhelming odds, focused solely on killing his foe. A heavy clash forced both men to stumble back. Poke gasped for air, his arm numb from the repeated blocks. He looked at Oliver with newfound dread. This cripple was a genuine threat. Poke resolved to kill him now, while Oliver braced himself for the next strike. The world narrowed down to just the two of them. Poke's youth and stamina began to tilt the scales in his favor. Oliver's strength and energy were rapidly depleting. His splinted leg trembled, and agony threatened to overwhelm his resolve. Poke spotted a momentary stumble caused by Oliver's pain. He seized the chance, kicking viciously at Oliver's injured knee. A sickening crunch echoed as the joint buckled. Oliver roared in pain, his vision blurring as he collapsed to the right. Poke lunged, swinging his scimitar toward Oliver's exposed neck. Instinctively, Oliver raised his arming sword to block the killing blow. The impact was deafening. Oliver's single-arm defense was no match for Poke's full-force strike. His sword was knocked away, spinning into the blood-soaked mud. Unable to stand, Oliver crashed onto the cold, gore-slicked ground. He looked up at the triumphant Solon knight looming over him. Poke raised his blade, the cold steel glinting in the light. Oliver felt a deep sense of regret. He had failed. He had lost Grey Wolf Valley, the army's only retreat route. His death mattered little, but the potential destruction of Lord Ai's army was a catastrophe. As despair took hold, a sharp whistle pierced the air. A spear struck home. The expected pain never came. Oliver opened his eyes to see Poke frozen in shock. A spear had impaled Poke's arm, knocking him off balance. Poke screamed, dropping his weapon as he looked toward the source. A group of Confort soldiers, bloodied and exhausted, charged from the east. They were the garrison from the walls, now free from the enemy. The Solon forces had collapsed after suffering heavy losses and seeing their commander missing. With the enemy retreating, the Confort defenders had been liberated. They had rushed to the heart of the battle just in time. The officer leading them had thrown the life-saving spear. "Protect Oliver. Kill these sullen bastards," the officer roared. The Confort soldiers swarmed in. Poke went pale, realizing the tide had turned. Driven by survival instinct, I used my left hand to hack at the javelin shaft embedded in my right arm, enduring agonizing pain to snap it short. The shaft broke, leaving only a fragment in my arm. Though blood flowed, I was now mobile. Confort soldiers swarmed the remaining Solon soldiers, quickly slaughtering them. A Confort swordsman spotted me and hurled another javelin at me. I scrambled up and dove aside just as the weapon flew toward me. The javelin missed, embedding itself deep into the mud behind me. Mid-dive, I hurled my short axe at the swordsman with all my remaining strength. The swordsman raised his shield to block. The axe struck the shield with a dull thud. I seized the moment of distraction to sprint toward the southeast wall I had originally scaled. I aimed for the spot where Oliver had previously pinned a Solon soldier to the wall with a spear. The dead soldier and the spear now served as a makeshift step. A Confort officer shouted, and arrows rained down on me. Ignoring the pain in my arm, I leaped, planting my foot on the spear's shaft protruding from the wall. I vaulted upward, grabbing the wall's edge. An arrow struck my back, but my chainmail and iron-studded leather armor prevented a fatal wound. Despite the pain, I pulled myself up, hooking my leg over the parapet. I hauled myself onto the wall as arrows and javelins clattered against the bricks around me. Without looking back, I jumped outside. I landed hard in the mud, vomiting blood from the internal impact and my fresh wounds. I scrambled up and fled, glancing back in terror. Inside, the fighting had ceased. The Confort soldiers were celebrating. My elite troops and the two knights were likely dead. Leaning against a tree, I stared at the javelin fragment in my arm, thinking, damn it, at least I survived. I leaned against a charred stump and pulled the arrow from my back. The tip was barely stained. My armor had held, though the impact left a deep bruise. I looked west, where old Barton and his men had vanished. Cowardly trash, I cursed, certain Barton had fled. Had Barton attacked the west side, the battle's outcome might have changed. Regret was useless. I needed to rally my survivors. The sounds of victory inside the fortress confirmed my men were wiped out. The loss of my knights and their personal guards was a devastating blow. Without my elite corps, I was left with demoralized peasants and thugs. I forced myself to move, scouring the ruins to threaten and whip the scattered Solon stragglers back into formation. Gather up. Deserters will be executed. I eventually rounded up about 120 broken, wounded soldiers. Their morale was shattered, and their appearance terrified the others. Seeing my blood-soaked state and the javelin in my arm only deepened their fear. I hid my despair and led the remnants out of range of the fortress's projectiles. There, they encountered old Barton and his unit. Barton had over 200 men, mostly unscathed. I seethed with rage. My elite force was destroyed while this coward remained intact. Too weak to fight, I glared at Barton and signaled for the groups to merge. The atmosphere was tense. My men looked at Barton's unit with resentment, while Barton's men looked away in shame. I sat on a rock, and Barton approached with a nervous, fawning smile. "My lord, your wounds." Barton stammered. Ignoring him, I pulled a small crystal vial containing a glowing blue magic potion from my tunic. A gift from Galash, it could accelerate healing and dull pain, but at the cost of my life force. It was time. I uncorked the vial and downed the liquid. A sensation of icy heat surged through me. With a grimace, I grabbed the javelin fragment in my arm and yanked it out. Blood gushed as the wood tore free, accompanied by a stifled cry. Miraculously, the blue potion slowed the bleeding almost immediately. Even more shocking, the flesh around the wound began to knit together with visible speed. The agonizing pain dulled to a manageable ache, replaced by a surge of artificial strength. Barton watched in horror, his fear of me deepening at my ruthless self-treatment. I breathed easier, my face regaining a flush of color. I turned my cold gaze back toward the gray Wolf Valley fortress. The Confort soldiers had abandoned their western positions and retreated into the central fortress. The enemy's forces are depleted, forcing them to abandon their outer perimeter and consolidate at the central fortress. Giving up the west side. Poke mused. Hard to say if that's good or bad. While they no longer need to split forces to attack support points, the enemy's defense is now concentrated, making the final assault significantly more dangerous and costly. But it means the next fight is the last, Poke thought grimly. One side will be wiped out. The sun set, painting the clouds blood red. The brutal fighting had lasted from dawn until afternoon, leaving both sides exhausted and bled dry. Poke looked at his 300 men. Despite outnumbering the enemy, morale was shattered, discipline was gone, and his elite knights and personal guards were dead. The enemy has lost about 100, Poke estimated. They have fewer than 100 left, all wounded and exhausted. Despite his numerical advantage, Poke knew his fearful, demoralized troops might mutiny or turn on him if he ordered another immediate assault. He took a deep breath, suppressing his frustration. "Army," he croaked, loud enough for most to hear. "Cook and rest." The command brought a wave of relief, easing the suffocating tension. But his next words shattered the calm. "Post sentries. No one leaves the ranks. Death to anyone who disobeys." He gave no time for the next attack. This uncertainty was both a threat and a reprieve. For these terrified men, even a moment's delay was a blessing. Soon, thin smoke rose as soldiers silently cooked thin porridge or chewed cold rations, the only sounds being crackling wood and heavy breathing. Sitting on a rock, Poke examined his scabbing wound and stared at the blurred silhouette of the gray Wolf Valley fortress. Night was falling. The final battle would come tonight or at dawn. He had to devise a plan during this break to reignite his soldiers' fighting spirit. Failure meant not just defeat, but severe punishment or death from gouache. Torrential rain pounded the fortress, drowning out all other sounds in the wilderness. Inside the central fortress, the air was heavy with the stench of blood, moldy leather, sweat, and exhaustion. I leaned against a support pillar, my upper body stripped and covered in bruises and blood. The wounds from the Solon Knight's scimitar were jagged and gruesome in the torchlight. A young apprentice medic cleaned the wounds with alcohol. Every touch made my muscles tense, though I showed no pain beyond cold sweat. I scanned the fortress. Fewer than 50 men could still stand and maintain a guard. Including the wounded lying on straw, there were fewer than 100 left. The day's battle had been devastating. The Solon Knight leader had committed his elite, chainmail-clad personal guards to the assault. Arrows rained like locusts, scaling ladders were raised, and blood sprayed with every clash of steel. The defenses were shattered, barricades pushed over, and an arrow tower burned. They held only through the fortress's durability, traps, desperate resistance, and a stroke of luck. The cost was half their force and total physical and mental exhaustion. I knew the enemy had suffered too. Most of the elite Solon Knight personal guards lay dead in the trenches or at the walls. The enemy could not mount another assault of that intensity soon. The next attack might be delayed or more cunning, but never as reckless as today's. This was the only consolation in this bloody defense. Once bandaged, I gritted my teeth and stood up, using a wooden pole as a crutch. I forced myself to stand straight despite the stinging pain. I looked at my soldiers, young men who were farmers, woodcutters, and apprentices months ago. They lacked the joy of survival or the thrill of victory, possessing only hollow numbness and deep fatigue. Many stared blankly at the rain or the fire, their bodies bloodied and bandaged. I recognized this state. I had crawled through such hells myself. During the fight, adrenaline suppressed fear, leaving only the instinct to kill or be killed. But once the tension broke, the suppressed horrors flooded back. The faces of dying comrades and the flash of enemy blades haunted them. They were on the verge of collapse, needing only a nudge to break. I couldn't let them sink into despair. I inhaled the smoky air and began to limp among my men. I had an excellent memory and knew almost all 100 men by name, including their backgrounds. I stopped before a young soldier leaning against a wall, his face smeared with mud and blood. "Tom," I said, my voice cutting through the rain. "From Oak Village, right? Your father was a carpenter, and you were learning to make wheels." Tom looked up, his focus slowly returning, and nodded. "Wheels are hard," I said casually, my face stern. "The joints must be perfect, or they rattle and fall apart. How much of your father's craft have you learned? Tom's lips trembled. Still learning the spokes. The spokes are vital, I said, patting Tom's cheek with a rough, comforting hand. Live to go home and master your father's craft. Make me a sturdy wheel. My old bones can't handle the bumps. Tom stared at me, his eyes reddening as he bowed his head, shoulders shaking. I moved on to a large man who had fought bravely, but was now curled up, hugging his knees. Hans, your cow Spot should be calving this year, right? You said she always swished her tail in your face. Hans looked up with bloodshot eyes and nodded. If you go back after the war, Spot will probably gore you for not milking her for so long, Oliver said. His lips twitched, barely a smile, but his eyes held deep understanding. He patted Hans's face. Stay out of her way then, or it'll be embarrassing to get gored by your own cow. Hans tried to grin but failed, letting out a long sigh as his tense body finally relaxed. Oliver walked among them, calling names and talking about their homes, families, and pre-war lives. Whether it was the timing of the rain for crops, the heat of the forge, or a dog stealing food, his simple, steady words acted like lifelines, pulling their minds back from the brink of terror and numbness in this desolate fortress. He remembered Roy's sister's upcoming wedding, Rick's craving for his mother's meat pies, and old Kevin's hidden love for his grandchildren. The atmosphere in the fortress shifted. Soft sobs broke out, not of collapse, but of emotional release. Men began to talk, sharing hometown stories or checking each other's wounds. The devil instructor, Oliver, usually harsh enough to make leaves fall with his shouts, was now patting their faces and speaking of their most cherished people. He was no longer just a commander, but an older brother figure, the only anchor they had in this foreign land of death. Oliver leaned against a central pillar, scanning the men. The fortress, once deathly silent, now hummed with a resilient, if pained, vitality. Listen up, his voice rasped with undeniable authority. The war isn't over. The enemy may return when the rain stops, but we held the line tonight. You are all heroes. Remember why you're here, for your families, for the lives you want to return to, and for the brothers who fell today. He paused, enunciating clearly. Rest if you can, stay alert if you're on watch. The sun will rise tomorrow, and we must still be standing. The soldiers looked at him, their numbness replaced by a complex mix of grief, exhaustion, and a rekindled spark. They leaned closer to one another, gripping their weapons or simply sharing warmth. Oliver, enduring his own pain, leaned on a wooden staff and walked toward the door to check the sentries. His silhouette in the flickering firelight looked exhausted, yet as sturdy and unyielding as the fortress itself. Deep in the forest, the rain poured down. Thick clouds swallowed the moon, with only occasional lightning illuminating the drenched, dark world. A horse's hoof smashed into a water-filled pit, sending mud and water flying. Leon galloped forward, his body nearly parallel to the horse's back. Cold rain lashed his helmet and iron-studded leather armor, seeping into his clothes and draining his warmth. He gripped the reins tightly, standing in the stirrups in a half-crouch. This was the standard posture for long-distance galloping to prevent spinal injury and reduce the horse's fatigue. By using his legs and core to buffer the impact, he maintained speed while minimizing strain. 50 elite cavalrymen followed him, the most experienced of my force. Each man led 2 or 3 horses, swapping mounts to maintain their breakneck pace. Leon's eyes pierced the darkness, fixed on the muddy, obscured path ahead. He watched the ground intently. At this speed, a hidden route or pit meant certain disaster. A single misstep could cause a horse to stumble. At this velocity, a fall meant being thrown with lethal force. Hitting a tree or rock at such speeds usually meant death or permanent injury. Yet, they had no choice. Yesterday, the situation was dire. They had been besieging Nayland Castle, a key Solonian stronghold, but the defense was unexpectedly fierce. A mud-caked Conford soldier stumbled into camp. He had run dozens of kilometers on foot after his horse died, arriving on the verge of death. I fed him a precious militia potion, saving his life, though the soldier remained in a deep coma. He carried a note. Grey Wolf Valley under siege. Need reinforcements, Oliver. Grey Wolf Valley was their only supply line and retreat route. Its loss would doom the entire army. I immediately ordered the cavalry to rescue the valley at all costs. Leon selected 50 of his best riders. He pooled every available horse, war horses, captured Solonian mounts, and pack animals, to ensure each man had multiple mounts. Their goal: reach the valley at the limit of human and equine endurance to stabilize the line. To save time, they took a dangerous, rugged hunting trail through the dense forest. It was shorter but treacherous, especially in the rain. Nay, Art! A piercing shriek of a horse and a man's cry erupted from the rear. Leon's heart tightened as he glanced back. A lightning flash revealed a horse stepping into a hidden pit, its legs snapping with a sickening crunch before the animal flipped. The rider was thrown, slamming into a thick tree trunk with a dull thud. Silence followed, save for the horse's struggling and the gasps of the other riders. Leon felt a pang of grief. He knew the young rider, but he forced himself to look forward, his face a mask of iron. They could not stop. Every second mattered. Stopping meant the fall of Grey Wolf Valley and the destruction of their army's rear. Sacrifice was the price. The only way to honor it was to ride faster. Faster! Keep up! Leon roared through the rain, urging his cavalry forward. His shout cut through the storm. The cavalrymen, though pale, maintained their breakneck pace without hesitation. They leaned low over their horses, grips tightening on the reins, their eyes filled with desperate resolve. They had to reach the valley before it was too late. Leon focused on the road, praying silently. "Oliver, old friend, hold on. Wait for us. We're almost there." The cavalry charged through the dark, rain-drenched forest like a burning arrow aimed at the fate-deciding valley. Oliver, despite his exhaustion and wounds, moved among the traumatized recruits, his steady words grounding their fraying nerves. After settling the men, he ordered those off duty to rest, preparing for the inevitable next assault. The Solonians struck sooner than expected. Late that night, as the rain eased slightly, a sharp, frantic alarm bell pierced the fortress's silence. "Enemy attack!" the sentry screamed. The men, already on edge, scrambled up instantly, donning wet armor and grabbing weapons before rushing out. Oliver was the first out, ignoring the searing pain in his injured leg. He climbed the eastern wall and raised his telescope, peering into the gloom. Through the rain, he saw a massive, dense sea of Solonians emerging from the woods, more than they had faced all day. "They're throwing everything at us," Oliver whispered. The Solon commander, having suffered heavy losses, knew time was running out and was launching a final, desperate gamble. Realizing this was the end, a fire ignited in Oliver. He turned and leaped from the wall. He landed hard, his legs screaming in agony, but he forced himself to stabilize. The soldiers, gathered below, stared in shock as Oliver stood up. "Soldiers! Brothers!" Oliver bellowed, his voice cutting through the rain. "This is our final stand. The entire Solon army is here. Every last one of them." He gestured to the encroaching shadows. "Win this, and we secure the Lord's flank. We keep Grey Wolf Valley for Cranford. When we return, rewards and promotions await. I stake my life on it." He roared. "Now give me everything. All your strength, all your courage. Hold the line." He raised his arming sword toward the dark night. "For Cranford! For the Lord! For Cranford! For the Lord!" The men echoed, their voices growing into a defiant roar. Fear was replaced by a surge of blood-fueled courage. Victory meant survival and glory. "Good!" Oliver shouted. "Form ranks. Prepare for the charge." Led by the remaining veterans, the soldiers quickly formed a tight phalanx. Spearmen took the front, shield-bearers the rear, eyes locked on the crumbling wall. Oliver knew this fight would be different. The rain rendered their Molotov cocktails useless, as the fuses wouldn't light and the flames wouldn't spread. Worse, the wall, already damaged from the day's fighting, was disintegrating under the relentless downpour. Mud washed away and timbers loosened. The defense was on the verge of collapse. Oliver placed only a few archers on the remaining structures to harass the enemy, saving his main force for the inevitable breach. Tactics were now irrelevant. This would be a raw, brutal clash of steel and flesh. I stood at the front of the phalanx, gripping my notched sword. Only the most iron-willed would survive. I watched the black tide of enemies drawing closer. Behind me lay my men and the Lord's supply line. Ahead lay the enemy. There was no retreat, only the fight until my final breath. Poke, leading 300 Solon soldiers with makeshift shields, charged the fortress. The muddy ground made the advance difficult, but the rain provided cover. The few remaining archers fired, but the poor visibility rendered their shots largely ineffective. Soon, the archers exhausted their quivers and joined the melee line. The real assault began. Solonians rushed forward with a makeshift battering ram, targeting the weakened section of the wall. 1-2 strike. The ram slammed home. The wall groaned, mud and stone spraying outward. Again, strike. With a deafening crash of splintering wood and collapsing stone, the wall gave way, revealing the two armies to each other. The breach was open. Oliver and Poke both roared the same command. Charge. For Solon. Kill them all. The two desperate armies collided at the breach like clashing floods, consumed by the madness of the final struggle. Before the soldiers clashed, both sides unleashed a hail of throwing axes and spears, aiming to shatter enemy formations with sheer density. Axes bit into shields and chests. Javelins pierced leather armor, pinning men to the mud. The frontline soldiers fell instantly, trampled by their own advancing comrades. The survivors ignored the carnage, driven only by the singular urge to kill or be killed at the breach. Spearmen, seal the breach. Oliver roared. The remaining Conford spearmen formed a desperate, thin wall of points against the incoming tide. Against the frenzied, superior numbers of the Solon soldiers, the formation was dangerously fragile. Poke charged ahead, swinging a heavy battle axe to hack at the spear shafts rather than parrying the points. Snap! Snap! The wooden shafts splintered under the axe, leaving the spearmen defenseless. Axemen advance. Oliver commanded, his eyes bloodshot. Conford axemen and swordsmen surged through the gaps to meet the Solonians. Clang! Thud! A brutal, chaotic melee erupted in the narrow breach, the sounds of slaughter drowning out the rain. Steel flashed through the downpour, painting the mud dark red with blood. Piles of corpses and broken weapons constricted the space, turning the fight into a claustrophobic slaughterhouse. Both sides fought like beasts, abandoning tactics for primal, desperate violence. The slaughter dragged on, blood and rain pooling at their feet. The Conford defenders' exhaustion and numerical disadvantage began to take their toll. With over 300 men against Oliver's fewer than 100, the Solonians steadily pushed the defenders back toward the fortress. Poke, having fought for nearly 2 days without rest, was physically and mentally drained. Yet, fueled by the finality of the battle and residual magic potion, he fought with renewed ferocity. He acted as a tireless killing machine, his reckless swings demoralizing the Conford ranks. After felling a sergeant, Poke locked eyes with his nemesis, the limping Commander Oliver. Oliver met his gaze, both men radiating pure, murderous intent. Poke snatched his last 2 throwing axes and hurled one with all his remaining strength. Oliver, familiar with the Solon Knight's tactics, anticipated the move. He drew his own backup axe and threw it instinctively to intercept. Clang! The axes collided in midair, sparking before embedding themselves in the mud. The clash signaled the final duel. Poke charged with his battle axe. Oliver met him with his arming sword. Clang! Clang! Poke's strikes were heavy and crushing, while Oliver's swordplay was agile, his limping footwork surprisingly sharp in the face of death. Rain and blood blurred their vision, yet neither slowed. The surrounding battle faded. They existed only to destroy one another. Their duel became the pivot point for the morale of both armies. The torrential rain could not wash away the overwhelming scent of blood. Oliver and Poke fought a desperate, grueling battle. Poke relied on raw power, while Oliver used experience and sheer will to survive. Both were bleeding, but the tide of the larger battle was turning. With only a dozen men left, the Conford defenders were pushed back to the door of the central fortress, formerly Lord Derek's residence. Realizing the battle was lost, Oliver chose a tactical retreat over a suicidal stand. He parried a blow and roared, "Retreat!" Inside the house, the survivors scrambled toward the heavy wooden door, with Oliver covering their withdrawal before slipping inside himself. Bang! The door slammed shut and was bolted. "Quick! Barricade it!" Oliver commanded, ignoring his wounds. The The soldiers piled furniture against the door to create a makeshift barrier. Thud, thud. The Solonians immediately began battering the door. The defenders pressed their bodies against the furniture to hold the line. Poke watched the door with a cold, triumphant smirk. "Bring the battering ram," he ordered. The log used to breach the wall was brought forward to smash the door. Poke knew victory was inevitable. He had over 200 men against their dozen. Despite heavy losses, Grey Wolf Valley, the throat of Conford, was finally within his grasp. He felt a surge of exhaustion and pride at fulfilling Galash's mission. Once they held the valley, they would trap my army between them and Galash's main force coming from Nalan Castle. A glorious victory and immense rewards awaited him. Poke inspected his battered, blood-stained scimitar by the firelight, his reflection reminding him of the crippled veteran from Conford. He admitted the man was formidable. Had I been whole, my skill and experience would have surely defeated Poke. If only there were a chance for a fair duel, Poke thought, feeling a rare sense of mutual respect. For a warrior, meeting a worthy opponent was a rare, meaningful experience. But that opportunity was gone forever. Shaking off the thought, he turned his cold, focused gaze toward the Lord's house. "Ready, ram," Poke ordered. The soldiers slammed a heavy log into the door, shaking the frame, and the furniture barricaded behind it. Again, ram. The second strike was more violent. The door buckled and cracked, and the cabinet behind it groaned under the pressure. Inside, Oliver and his men strained against the furniture, each impact hammering their hearts and forcing them back, draining their hope. Despair gripped Oliver. He knew the door would soon fall, sealing their fate. His eyes landed on a table holding a dozen unused Molotov cocktails. These were their final reserves, meant for defense, though using them indoors was suicidal. A desperate, insane idea took root in Oliver's mind. Another heavy blow shattered the lead cabinet, exposing the splintered, deformed door. Oliver released the furniture and rushed to the table, drawing the soldiers' attention. "Brothers, stop holding it. We can't hold them back," Oliver rasped. Trusting him, the men instinctively released the barricade. The furniture shifted, on the verge of collapse. Oliver held up a Molotov cocktail, scanning the weary, blood-streaked faces of his men. "We can't hold much longer. When the door breaks, we die," he said calmly. "Instead of being slaughtered like chickens by the Solonians, let's choose our own end." With a wild look, he added, "Burn this house. Use the fire to block the Solonians. Let this blaze be their funeral." He paused, his gaze sharp. "But the fire will block our exit too. We will be consumed, burned to charcoal. It will be painful. Are you willing?" he asked softly. Silence fell, save for the pounding on the door and the Solonians' shouts. Fear, resentment, and anger flickered across their faces before hardening. A massive impact shook the house, toppling a wooden crate and snapping the men out of their trance. A young recruit rushed forward, his eyes bloodshot and resolute. He grabbed a Molotov cocktail and roared, "I'm not afraid to die. Let's take them with us." He lit the fuse and hurled the flaming jar at the door with all his might. The jar shattered, splashing burning oil across the door and furniture, instantly igniting a wall of fire. Seeing the lead, the others shed their fear of death. "I'm not afraid. Fight them," a veteran shouted, throwing his own Molotov cocktail. "Burn it all. Leave nothing for the Solonians," another joined in. "For Conford. For the Lord," they cried, hurling Molotov cocktails at the doors, windows, and walls. Soon, the entire room was ablaze, filling with thick smoke and intense heat. Oliver stood amidst the flames, watching his men choose this grim end in silence. Outside, flames and smoke poured from the windows, defying the heavy rain. Solon soldiers hit by splashing oil screamed and rolled in the mud. The rain extinguished the flames, but their flesh was charred. Poke watched coldly, his expression unmoved by the screams or the fire. "These Plantagenets, they really aren't afraid to die, burning themselves alive," he muttered. His voice held a trace of complex respect, which he quickly suppressed into pure indifference. "Good," Poke told his deputy. "It saves us from having to send men in for urban warfare and suffering more casualties." He ordered his troops to stop, hold their distance, and wait for the fire to burn out. The Solon soldiers felt a wave of relief. They had taken the fortress, but they felt only exhaustion and numbness. Many even felt a strange sense of gratitude toward the defenders for choosing self-immolation. Yes, gratitude. It spared them from a final, bloody room-to-room fight against desperate men. They were merely conscripted farmers. They only wanted to return to their fields and live in peace. Their involvement in this war was forced. Many of their kin had already died in the mud, soaked in blood and fire. Numb to death and victory, they began to clear the battlefield under the orders of their officers. They dragged the bodies of their comrades and enemies into separate piles. They searched for survivors, offering crude aid with torn rags and herbal pastes. Though largely futile, it was all they could do. From a captured outpost, old Barton leaned against a broken window, watching the burning house of Lord Derek. The fire raged, defying the rain, leaving old Barton with a hollow, indescribable feeling. Relief? Yes, it was finally over. Although old Barton's men suffered heavy casualties, they had finally captured Grey Wolf Valley, fulfilling their mission and escaping Poke's threats. Yet, a deeper sense of dread replaced my relief. I feared this was only the beginning. Holding the valley against Conford's main force, led by Lord Carl's elite army, would be a living hell. How many of my battered men could survive that? I felt a bitter realization. To the commanders, our lives were merely expendable chess pieces. As old Barton spiraled into these dark thoughts, cavalry incoming. A sentry screamed from a window, his voice cracking with terror. Startled, old Barton rushed to the window to peer outside. Through the rain, he saw a cavalry unit tearing through the downpour toward the valley, moving like a sharp blade. They were moving at breakneck speed, each rider managing 3 horses, a sign of a desperate, long-distance forced march. Their target was the burning building where Poke and his main force were stationed. Damn it! Friend or foe? Old Barton's heart raced, but the rain and darkness obscured their banners. A chilling premonition gripped him. These riders, charging with such reckless speed from the west, could not be allies. Galash's main force was still near Nayland Castle and would never approach with such a suicidal charge. Quick! Fire the signal arrow. Alert everyone! Old Barton roared, his voice shrill with panic. An archer immediately leaned out and fired a specialized signal arrow into the dark, rainy sky. Whistle pop. The sharp sound pierced the rain, clearly audible even over the storm. The warning reached Poke and his men, who were resting near the central fortress ruins. Hearing the signal, Poke's face turned ashen. He and his sullen soldiers turned in unison toward the sound. In the distance, a dark, moving mass was tearing through the rain at terrifying speed. The sound of hooves thundering against the mud echoed like the drums of death. Poke squinted, trying to identify the approaching force, but the storm rendered everything a blur. However, old Barton's signal arrow confirmed his worst fears. Damn that Carl. He's more decisive than I thought. Poke gritted his teeth in frustration. He looked at the burning central fortress. The fire had reached the roof, and the heavy rain couldn't extinguish it. He was filled with regret. Had he pushed to capture the fortress earlier instead of waiting for the fire to die down, they could have used its stone walls to defend against the cavalry. But it was too late. Now, they were forced to fight on open, muddy ground against Conford's reinforcements. Exhausted, demoralized infantry stood no chance against a fresh, charging cavalry in the rain. Form ranks. Spears forward. Archers, Poke bellowed, trying to rally his panicked men. But the soldiers had already broken. 2 days of brutal fighting and the sight of the defenders' self-immolation had pushed these conscripted peasants to their limit. They had expected the battle to be over, not to face a fresh cavalry charge. They were paralyzed by fear. To these light infantrymen, the cavalry charge in the dark rain felt like an inescapable natural disaster. I'm done. I want to go home, a young soldier cried, dropping his weapon and fleeing into the darkness. Panic spread like wildfire. Run? We can't win. I don't want to die here. Seeing the first deserters, the remaining discipline crumbled instantly. Soldiers screamed and scattered in every direction, desperate to escape the encroaching shadow of death. Stop! Come back! Deserters will be executed. Poke roared, waving his saber, trying to restore order through threats. He stumbled forward, attempting to cut down a fleeing soldier as an example. But he was utterly exhausted. After a day and night of combat, his strength was spent, sustained only by the remnants of a magic potion. He tripped and collapsed into the mud, his wounds flaring with agonizing pain. "My lord!" His deputy rushed over to pull him up. Watching his army disintegrate, Poke trembled with rage. Damn deserters, useless trash. His curses were swallowed by the rain. He could only lean on his deputy, gasping for air. The deputy looked at the approaching cavalry, their lances and sabers glinting in the dark, and sobbed. "My lord, what do we do? We can't hold them." Poke stared at the incoming riders. After a moment of silence, his rage gave way to cold, rational despair. They were defeated, not by the enemy, but by their own rabble of an army. "Run," Poke whispered. "What?" the deputy asked. "Run. To the mountains." Poke shoved him, his voice hoarse. "Survival is all that matters now. Forget these fools." The deputy hesitated. "But what about Lord Galash?" "Galash will understand," Poke replied with a bitter, twisted smile. "This lot is useless. Better to save our lives and seek revenge later." The deputy nodded, finally resolved. "Understood, my lord." They abandoned the battlefield, stumbling toward the rugged, complex terrain of Grey Wolf Mountain, away from the charging cavalry. Before leaving, Poke cast one last, hateful look at the burning building. Grey Wolf Valley was lost, and the mission failed. All sacrifices had been in vain, thwarted by that old cripple. "I hope we meet again," Poke whispered coldly. Next time, he would leave nothing to chance. He turned away, disappearing into the dark, rainy forest with his aide. Behind him, the Carnford cavalry tore through the broken Solonian ranks, but Poke was already gone. His only remaining thought was survival and vengeance. Leon and 50 elite cavalry charged into the collapsing Solonian forces like a whirlwind of death. Sabers flashed and lances pierced through the rain as iron hooves trampled the fleeing enemy. It was a one-sided slaughter. The Solonians, unable to resist, fled in despair. Exhausted from their long-distance raid, Leon's men were reaching their limits. After scattering the remnants, Leon halted the pursuit and ordered his men back to the central fortress. Rain washed over the bloody battlefield as Leon approached the smoldering Lord's Keep. He dismounted, ignored the heat and smoke, and kicked the charred, swaying gate. The gate shattered into ash and splinters. Instantly, a threat emerged. A short-handled, throwing axe whistled from the darkness toward Leon's face. Reacting on instinct, Leon dodged and parried with his saber. The blade struck the axe, sending it embedding into a burning pillar. "It's me, Leon, reinforcements for Lord I," he shouted through the smoke. Silence followed, then coughing and rustling. In the firelight, Leon saw several smoke-stained figures in the corner lower their weapons. Leon stepped inside, his eyes locking onto the man huddled among the soldiers. Despite the soot and blood, Leon recognized me immediately. "Oliver," Leon smiled with relief. "Is this your greeting? You nearly cracked my skull." Oliver realized the reinforcements had arrived just in time. A surge of relief and gratitude washed over him. He stood up, limping painfully toward Leon. Leon moved to meet him. They embraced tightly amidst the heat and smoke. The hug spoke volumes. "Let's get out of here before this place collapses on us," Leon urged. With help, the dozen surviving Carnford garrison soldiers exited the ruins. The cold rain felt like a blessing to their scorched throats and lungs. Many collapsed, greedily drinking the rain and coughing up smoke. The cavalry dismounted to provide medical aid and militia potion. The supplies were simple but sufficient to stabilize the wounded. Oliver drank from Leon's canteen and asked, "How is Lord I's army?" It was his primary concern. Leon smiled, safe. "They are retreating, and the Solonians can't catch them." He looked at Oliver with respect. "If you hadn't held the retreat path, we would have been trapped and killed." Oliver shook his head. "And if you hadn't arrived, we would have burned to death." Even the veteran shuddered at the thought. Leon patted his shoulder. "That fire was a bold move. It broke the Solonian spirit and let us break through." As the rain lightened and dawn approached, Leon surveyed the battlefield. "Rest up, treat the wounded, and wait for the main army," Leon ordered. "We're going home together. The Solonians have lost this one." Morning mist clung to the Grey Wolf Mountain, shrouding Nayland Castle. Galash led 2,000 elite troops, including 500 cavalry, to the sight. His expression was grim. He had arrived too late. The castle gates were open, and the site was a wreck of battle. Cannon-shattered walls, charred wood, and corpses littered the grounds. The air reeked of gunpowder and blood, but my forces were gone. The main structure remained intact. I had abandoned the siege. It was a rational choice to avoid the heavy casualties of urban warfare. Galash realized I had anticipated the pincer movement. I had used my artillery to cause chaos and cover my retreat before slipping away. Decisive and cunning, Galash muttered, surprised by the young lord of Carnford. He was left with nothing but a ruined castle and a vanished enemy. Bring me the master of Nayland Castle. Now, Galash commanded his aide. A middle-aged man in damaged chainmail, the commander of Nayland Castle, was brought forward, looking visibly shaken. My lord, the commander bowed, his voice trembling. Cut the chatter. Galash interrupted impatiently. When did the Carnford people leave? How many? Which way? Yesterday afternoon, my lord, he replied. About 1,500 to 1,600 remain, mostly infantry with supplies. They headed southeast along the main road, likely toward Grey Wolf Valley. Galash calculated quickly, 1,600 men, mostly infantry. They would be slow. With his 500 elite cavalry, he could catch them before they reached the valley, or at least maul their rear guard and stall them. Grey Wolf Valley. Poke. Galash's eyes flashed. Success depended on Poke seizing and holding the valley. If Poke blocked the exit, Galash could crush the Carnford forces in a pincer movement. Forward. To Grey Wolf Valley. Galash ordered, turning his horse. The order was relayed immediately. Galash's cavalry surged out of Nayland Castle like a steel torrent, followed by the infantry in a forced march. As the morning mist cleared, Galash burned with the intent to strike before the enemy reached safety. 10 miles out, the scouts suddenly cried out in chaos. A lead scout's horse tripped on a hidden obstacle, throwing its rider hard against the ground. The following cavalry scrambled to halt, causing a pile-up. What happened? Galash barked. A tripwire, my lord, an officer reported, grimacing. Hidden under leaves and dirt. Galash's face darkened. It was a trap to delay them. Cunning Plantagenets, he hissed, eyeing the seemingly flat road ahead with newfound suspicion. He anticipated more traps, pits, sharpened stakes, and mechanical triggers. His plan for a high-speed pursuit was now compromised. Slow the vanguard. Galash ordered reluctantly. Send scouts ahead. Safety first, no more reckless speed. He couldn't afford to waste his elite cavalry on traps. The officer saluted and left. The Solon army slowed, with scouts cautiously probing the path. Pursuit efficiency plummeted. Galash sat in his saddle, his frustration mounting, but he knew impatience was useless. Everything now rested on Poke. He trusted his fierce, loyal subordinate. If Poke could block me for even half a day, the pincer maneuver would succeed. He looked at the sky and the winding road, a cold smile touching his lips. Carl, enjoy your final moments. Grey Wolf Valley is your grave. Galash was unaware that Poke had already suffered a crushing defeat at the valley and fled into the mountains. The crucial defensive line no longer existed. Instead of a pincer victory, Galash would find only an empty valley. A long, tense pursuit unfolded across the Grey Wolf mountain trails. My exhausted but disciplined army marched ahead. Galash's elite forces followed, but were constantly delayed by my traps and sabotaged roads. Tripwires, pits, and felled trees forced the Solon troops to stop and clear paths repeatedly. Furthermore, I knew the terrain far better than Galash. By using shortcuts and terrain to my advantage, I maintained a one-day lead. After days of pursuit, Galash's initial confidence curdled into desperate, gnawing anxiety. Finally, one afternoon, I reached Grey Wolf Valley. Leon and Oliver were waiting at the entrance. The army cheered at the sight of their banners. My lord, Leon rode forward, visibly relieved. Leon, Oliver, you've done well. I felt deep gratitude, especially toward the battered Oliver. Without their stand, everything would be lost. The armies reunited, rested briefly, resupplied with captured rations, and departed the valley. When Galash finally arrived, he found only a desolate, war-torn village. The central fortress was a smoldering ruin. Other buildings were razed. The ground was littered with corpses and broken gear, the air thick with the stench of death. The victors had clearly long since departed. As Galosh stared in fury, a bloodied, bandaged figure emerged from the woods, supported by an aide. It was Poke. Pale and trembling, Poke pushed his aide away and knelt before Galosh, bowing his head. "My lord, I failed. I am incompetent. Punish me." Poke rasped. The surrounding soldiers held their breath, shocked to see the proud Poke so broken. Galosh stared down at him in a silence that felt like an eternity. Finally, he did not lash out. "Rise," Galosh said, his voice strangely calm and weary. "It is not entirely your fault." He looked at his own demoralized men and the ruins. He knew the limitations of his second-line troops, conscripted peasants against a desperate, well-led enemy, and realized this outcome was perhaps inevitable. Poke had done his best. Had reinforcements not arrived, he might have taken Grey Wolf Valley. Thank you, my lord." Poke choked out, struggling to stand with his aide's help. Galosh's mercy only deepened his guilt and frustration. Galosh ignored him, his gaze fixed on the direction my army had retreated. He sat silently on his horse for a long time, watching the mountains fade into twilight. The meticulously planned encirclement had failed miserably, resulting in heavy losses and the destruction of the Grey Wolf Valley outpost without eliminating my main force. "This young Lord Carl is harder to deal with than expected," Galosh muttered, his expression turning cold. "Set camp. We return to Nayland Castle tomorrow." Pursuit was pointless. I soon returned to Conford. Scouts had already announced the victory, so crowds of citizens gathered along the roads to welcome the returning troops. As the army appeared, deafening cheers erupted. People waved, shouted names, and offered food and water to the soldiers. "Long live the Lord! The heroes have returned. Praise the gods!" The cheers were filled with joy. The victory had crushed the Solonians' encirclement and boosted morale with captured spoils. Yet some wept. Those who couldn't find their fathers, sons, or brothers in the ranks stood silently, crying or desperately asking soldiers for news. The joy of victory and the grief of loss were intertwined. I, riding through the crowd, felt a mix of emotions. I waved to the cheering masses while offering comforting looks to the grieving. "Brendan, coordinate with Edgar. Count the casualties, especially the fallen. Ensure pensions are paid promptly and in full. We must not let our heroes' families suffer." "Yes, my lord." Brendan departed. I soon spotted my mother, Lady Irene, and Princess Louise waiting ahead. Both women watched me with relief and deep concern. I dismounted and hurried toward them. "Mother." I embraced her tightly. "You're back. You're finally back." Lady Irene sobbed, clutching me as if afraid I would leave again. I then turned to the princess. Louise blushed but stepped forward, sharing a brief, meaningful embrace that conveyed silent care. "Welcome back, Carl," Louise whispered. "Thank you, Louise," I replied. I instructed my officers to settle the troops before escorting my mother and the princess back to the castle. On the way, I recounted the campaign, the dangers, the struggle, the loss of Oliver, and Leon's timely arrival. Lady Irene wept, gripping my hand to confirm I was truly safe. "Don't cry, mother. I'm perfectly fine," I comforted her, wiping her tears. "Look, not a hair is missing." Calmed, Lady Irene sighed. "You must not go to war again. Stay home and rest." I nodded solemnly. "I promise. I will stay, accompany you, and manage the territory." Lady Irene smiled, finally at ease. Louise watched the pair with a gentle gaze. The war was temporarily over, though the road ahead was long. This was a moment of rare peace. North of Frostguard, the northern wasteland looked transformed under the spring sun. Once neglected, the land was now meticulously organized. The soil was deep plowed, and new irrigation channels diverted snowmelt, a direct result of Harold employing Plantagenet defectors. Under the guidance of experts like Albrecht, the Solonians adopted the advanced four-field crop rotation. This intensive farming reduced fallow periods and increased yields. Nearly 80,000 Plantagenet slaves were organized to reclaim land and plant rye, barley, and beans under the supervision of these defectors. The fields were now worked by organized slave labor rather than just women and the elderly. Increased agricultural efficiency triggered a chain reaction. More young Solonians were freed from farm work to be conscripted. Combined with forced levies from occupied territories, Harold's total force not only replaced the 3,000 elites lost at Conford, but grew by over 10,000. A larger, though still green, army was taking shape. Harold's ambition, however, went further. The devastating musket fire at Conford had left a deep impression. He knew future wars could not be won by cavalry and infantry courage alone. In a hidden basin miles from Frostguard, a quiet revolution was underway. 3,000 soldiers stood in loose, awkward formations. Wearing traditional leather armor, they held old matchlock muskets and a few flintlocks. These were either captured spoils or copies made by Solonian craftsmen under the instruction of Plantagenet prisoners. "Line up. Faster, you idiots," shouted instructors, Plantagenet defectors, cracking whips at those who moved too slowly. These instructors were veterans Harold had handpicked from the defectors. From a nearby ridge, Harold watched with his brother, Sven, and other high-ranking generals. "Brother, this is the new musketeer guard," Sven explained. "Mostly clever tribal youths and some capable defectors, trained by the prisoners. 2 months in, they can load and fire, but their aim is poor. Most importantly, they resent the muskets, preferring sabers and fearing the guns will explode." Harold scanned the field, noting the soldiers' tension and clumsiness. Their loading was stiff, their formations chaotic, and their target practice was abysmal. "Resentment," Harold sneered. "Tell them anyone who questions the musket will be tied to a target for live-fire practice. Their sabers won't save them from Plantagenet muskets." Sven nodded. "Understood." Harold continued. "Increase the intensity. Don't fear wasting powder. I want them to shred the enemy like the Conford garrison. Tell the instructors, results mean double rewards. Failure means death." "Yes," Sven replied, then hesitated. "However, our powder and lead reserves are low, and the quality of the muskets is inconsistent." Harold frowned. The Solon tribe lacked stable saltpeter, sulfur, and high-quality iron. Force the Plantagenet craftsmen to find a way. Increase exploration, and buy from the south at any cost through smugglers. Give the craftsmen more slaves and better treatment, but demand a military pledge for higher output and quality. I eyed my fledgling musketeer guard with ambition. This is our future. One day, I will make the defenders of Conford taste the power of concentrated artillery. I turned my horse, watching the phalanx train under the lash. "Let's go." "Any news from Conford?" I asked. Sven replied. "Gordon reports Karl's troops are raiding our border settlements. We've suffered losses, though Gordon has pushed them back." Harold's grip tightened on the reins. My recovery and resolve exceeded his worst expectations. Such resilience after a brutal siege was alarming. Yet, Harold's reason quickly overcame his fury. He dismissed the idea of attacking Conford immediately. The previous defeat had cost him thousands of elites and shattered his army's morale. His commanders would be hesitant to attack that fortress again. Furthermore, Leon's intelligence network had failed. Spies were either lost or fed misinformation. Conford's counterintelligence was too tight for a blind offensive. "A clown's tricks," Harold scoffed. "Let him be arrogant. Order the border units to fortify, avoid field battles, and endure these minor harassments." Sven was surprised. The Solonians usually retaliated with overwhelming force. Seeing Harold's cold gaze, he bowed. "Understood, brother." Harold looked toward the northwest. "Our priority is not Conford." "Then where?" Sven asked. "The Iron Islands," Harold declared. "The pirates and Plantagenet remnants there have seized our coastal forts and slaughtered our garrisons while we were occupied. It's an insult to our warriors. Worse, the opportunistic Valaya Principality senses our weakness after the Conford defeat and is increasing border friction. If we ignore the Iron Islands, Valaya may join them, leaving us surrounded. The Iron Islands are a minor ailment compared to Conford. Our new fleet is ready. A decisive naval victory will reclaim our territory, secure the coast, and seize pirate treasure to bolster our navy. More importantly, a victory will restore our prestige and prove the Solon army remains invincible." Sven nodded, his fighting spirit ignited. "Tell Leon to stop sending spies to Conford. It's a death trap," Harold ordered. "Shift all intelligence resources to the Iron Islands. They are fractured by internal conflicts between pirates, soldiers, and locals." Bribe their disgruntled leaders for intelligence on their defenses and routes. We need insiders for a successful landing. Understood. Sven saluted and left. Harold stood alone on the ridge, looking toward Conford with a cold smirk. Enjoy your time, Carl. Once I stabilize the rear, I will wipe you and Conford from this world. At Amber Bay, a merchant ship approached the wooden barge pier. Men in thick coats stood on deck, shielding themselves from the sea chill. One man stood out, his face obscured by a wide-brimmed felt hat. He scanned the snow-dusted mountains of Conford. His sharp eyes scrutinized the terrain, the new docks, and the distant fortresses. This was Franz of the Intelligence Bureau. After exposing the spy Thompson, Franz had earned Richter's trust. Richter tasked him with building an external intelligence network. Franz adopted a new identity. Posing as a refugee, he infiltrated the Grim caravan. Through bribes and hard work, he became a temporary laborer. He then leveraged a fake background as a sailor to join the crew. He was now a ship hand with access to trade routes. The Grim caravan was daring, driven by pure profit. They traded with Plantagenet guerrillas in Solon-controlled territory. These guerrillas were a mix of remnants. They included former regular soldiers, northern veterans, and locals oppressed by Solon. They survived in remote mountains and islands with harsh conditions. With royal aid cut off, they were desperate. They survived on meager farming and hunting, fueled only by hatred for the Solonians. Conford's rise and the reopening of Amber Bay provided a lifeline. The caravan brought grain to trade with the starving guerrillas. The guerrillas traded rare furs, medicinal herbs, and looted war spoils for food. It was a lucrative trade for the merchants and a vital survival line for the resistance. Although the Grim caravan engaged in smuggling, they paid taxes to me, so I left them be. On the other side of the deck, a man leaned against the railing, pale and trembling. He was suffering from severe seasickness. Franz stepped over, shielding him from view, and patted his back. Hold on, Ernst. We've docked. You'll be on solid ground soon. Ernst nodded weakly, unable to muster the strength to speak. Ernst was the Intelligence Bureau agent who had helped Franz capture a Solon spy in the shanty town. He was posing as Franz's younger brother to act as his assistant and eyes. While Franz was a seasoned guard used to the sea, Ernst was a total landlubber. The voyage had pushed him to his physical limit, forcing him to endure the nausea to avoid suspicion. The ship bumped against the crude barge pier, and support poles were extended to secure it. Sailors tossed cables to the guerrilla force waiting on the pier, and once the gangplank was set, the passengers disembarked. Ernst stumbled onto the pier, the sensation of solid ground instantly alleviating his nausea. He breathed in the earthy air, feeling as though he had returned to life. Franz followed, his eyes scanning the pier and shore. The port was a large, crescent-shaped natural harbor. The water was crowded with a chaotic mix of vessels. Franz spotted agile caravels for coastal trade, sturdy cogs, and oddly modified sloops likely used for illicit business. Most numerous were small fishing boats, their crews struggling to make a living. Franz's gaze lingered on a dilapidated carrack. Once a grand vessel, it now looked desolate. Its hull was riddled with holes, and the mainmast was snapped. The sails were gone, and the rigging hung like tattered webs. Half sunken in the shallows, it stood as a silent monument to the Iron Island's lost glory. Even the active ships were in poor condition. Hulls were peeling and encrusted with barnacles. Sails were a patchwork of rags. The laborers on deck were gaunt, ragged, and hollow-eyed from malnutrition. The port reeked of fish, sweat, and rotting wood. About 30 guerrilla force fighters stood guard on the pier. Despite their ragged appearance, they maintained a disciplined formation. An officer stood at the front, scrutinizing every merchant. The caravan leader approached the officer with a practiced, sycophantic smile. After a tense negotiation, a deal was struck. The guerrillas brought out bundles of high-quality animal furs. The caravan leader and his managers carefully inspected the goods. After further haggling, the trade was finalized. The leader signaled, and sailors began unloading heavy bags of rye flour. The guerrillas silently hauled the life-saving grain away. Franz observed the guerrillas closely while helping with the cargo. Their condition was worse than he had imagined. They wore rags and straw sandals, looking worse than the poorest refugees in Conford. Their faces were gaunt, yet their eyes burned with unwavering resolve. Were it not for their well-maintained weapons and scraps of armor, they would look like nothing more than desperate survivors fueled by hatred. The grain was quickly transferred, and the pier was cleared. The caravan leader then smiled shrewdly. "Brother, we also brought fresh vegetables from Conford, cabbage, radishes, turnips. A change of pace for your men." The officer's face showed a flicker of longing before he sighed. "I appreciate it, but we have no more furs to trade." The leader feigned regret. "A pity. These won't last long." As the leader turned to leave, the officer stared at the vegetable sacks, his throat bobbing. Finally, he called out, "Wait." He caught up to the leader, and they spoke in hushed, urgent tones. Franz and Ernst couldn't hear them, but the officer appeared agitated. Eventually, they reached a compromise. The leader waved his men over. "Fine, unload the vegetables. You lot, come with us and deliver them." Franz and Ernst grabbed sacks of vegetables. Escorted by guerrillas, they left the pier and headed inland along a winding dirt path. Franz and Ernst exchanged a look. This was their chance to scout the guerrillas' core territory. They observed their surroundings as they walked. The island was rugged, filled with black rock and dense brush. The mountain path was narrow and steep, easily defended. Franz recalled the map. This was the main island of the Iron Islands, a key stronghold for the Plantagenet guerrilla force. Sparse, struggling crops on terraced hillsides revealed the island's poor soil and climate, explaining the guerrillas' desperate need for food. Moving inland, signs of human activity increased. They passed crude stone-and-wood huts, hidden lookout posts, and training grounds. The guerrillas they encountered were gaunt but sharp-eyed and disciplined. Franz memorized the layout of paths, sentries, and camps. This accidental delivery provided a rare glimpse into the resistance. Their resilience in such hardship was valuable intelligence for Lord I. Deeper in, they encountered local farmers. These peasants were far worse off than the soldiers, appearing skeletal and wretched. Their skin clung to bone, ribs clearly visible. They wore rags, with children shivering in the spring chill. They labored with primitive tools, foraging for roots or patching crumbling huts. As Franz's group passed with vegetables, the starving locals stared with hollow, vacant eyes. A desperate silence hung in the air as they reached the hillside supply depot. The depot, guarded by two gaunt spearmen, was sturdier than the surrounding shacks. The officer returned, and the group unloaded the remaining grain. The officer distributed the fresh vegetables to his men, urging them to eat immediately. The soldiers received the greens with childlike joy. Some devoured raw radishes, wiping them on dirty sleeves, savoring the taste. Keeping only a small portion, the officer dismissed the men. Franz felt a flicker of respect for the officer's care for his subordinates. The officer led the caravan leader to a relatively decent stone house. After a brief, private exchange, the leader confirmed everything was ready. The leader dismissed the crew, telling them to return to the docks by evening. He then entered the house with the officer and closed the door. Through the thin walls, the sounds of intimacy soon drifted out. Franz realized the vegetables were payment for this service. The caravan leader had traded fresh food for a tryst, an unspoken perk of the deal. The other sailors, accustomed to this, grinned eagerly. An old, yellow-toothed sailor approached Franz and Ernst, calling them by their aliases, Mike and Jack. He invited them to join in, noting how cheap the services were compared to Conford. Franz and Ernst were using these aliases for their mission. With brothels and gambling banned in Conford, the idle sailors were desperate for release. The Iron Islands served as their lawless playground. Though the quality was poor, it was a rare diversion for them. Franz feigned interest and agreed, signaling Ernst to follow. I saw this as a prime opportunity to observe the island's social structure. Places like this were hubs for information and reflected the true state of the region. The old sailor led them away, and Franz and Ernst followed. They navigated the winding, muddy paths deeper into the island. The terrain was mostly rugged hills with little flat land. The hillsides were covered in a sprawling, endless shanty town of scrap wood and thatch. It was far worse than the initial refugee camps in Conford. The air reeked of sewage, excrement, and rot. Filthy water pooled in the streets, lacking any drainage. Rats scurried openly among the waste and human refuse. The scene reminded Franz of Conford's early, difficult days. However, Conford's camps were temporary, while this was a permanent state of survival. For these people, this squalor was the best they could hope for. Higher up the slope, better-built structures stood in contrast. These were clearly for the elite, highlighting the divide between the leadership and the starving populace. The poverty and despair were overwhelming. Islanders sat listlessly, staring into nothingness. Even more shocking were the unburied corpses being gnawed on by rats. Having survived the northern frontier, Franz and Ernst were hardened to such sights. The old sailor ignored the bodies, leading them to a cluster of slightly better huts. This was the entertainment district. He pushed open a door. The room was dim, smelling of mold, sweat, and cheap tobacco. A crude stone fire pit provided dim light and warmth in the center of the room. Gaunt women and thin, wide-eyed children huddled around the hearth. Seeing guests, the women scrambled up, offering numb, ingratiating smiles and competing for attention with thick accented chatter. The old sailor, a regular, grinned at Franz and Ernst. "Jack, Mike, this one's on me." Franz politely declined, insisting on paying himself. He handed a few copper coins to a woman who appeared to be in charge. The old sailor grabbed 2 women and headed for the loft, telling the others to take their pick. The remaining women swarmed Franz and Ernst, desperate for coins, pawing at them with hungry eyes. I suppressed my discomfort, memorizing every detail of the room and the women. I and Ernst each selected a young, malnourished woman. The chosen women led them toward a creaky wooden staircase with visible relief. I followed my companion into a partitioned corner of the loft. The space was bare, save for a rough wooden bed covered in hay and a foul-smelling, stained blanket. Through the thin walls, the sounds of the old sailor's activities made the atmosphere stiflingly awkward. The woman pulled the cloth curtain shut. Seeing me standing still, she looked uneasy. She timidly reached for my hand to guide me to the bed, following her usual routine. I gently but firmly pulled away, leaving her bewildered and panicked. She stammered, offering to call someone else if she had displeased me. She could not fathom why a paying customer would refuse service. "You're fine," I said calmly, pointing to a rickety stool. "I just want to talk." I attempted to sit. The stool snapped instantly, sending me crashing onto the cold, damp floor. The woman shrieked in terror, rushing to help me up with profuse, fearful apologies. I laughed off the embarrassment as I brushed off the dirt. I sat on the edge of the bed instead, causing the boards to groan. The woman stood trembling, wringing her clothes, too afraid to sit. I gestured for her to sit beside me. She complied, perching tensely on the very edge. "What's your name? Where are you from?" I asked gently. "Mia," she whispered. "From Ashbourne." Ashbourne was a northern frontier town near Conford, destroyed by Solonians in a battle between Leon and Thorstein. "How did you end up on this island?" Mia's eyes dimmed with pain. She choked out her story. Her family was slaughtered by Solonians. She escaped to the mountains and eventually followed refugees here, hearing of Plantagenet presence. I listened, feeling her deep-seated trauma. I asked a sharper question. Why choose this life? Surely marriage to a farmer would be better than this. Mia broke down, tears dripping onto the dirt floor. "I was defiled by those Solonian beasts," she sobbed. "I'm ruined. No one wants me, and I don't want to burden anyone else." Her words painted a portrait of a life shattered by war and loss of dignity. She was a victim of total displacement, forced into degradation just to survive. I sat in silence, processing her tragedy. I shifted to my primary objective. "The past is gone," I said calmly. "What kind of people come here?" Mia wiped her eyes. "Soldiers, farmers, fishermen, and merchants like you." A flicker of curiosity and faint hope appeared in her eyes. "Are you new? Did the kingdom's army retake the north? Did you come through Conford?" I was surprised by her specific mention of Conford. I saw a desperate, yearning light in her gaze. Realizing her boldness, she quickly looked down, apologizing. "Answer my question first," I commanded, noting the significance of her hope. It seemed the name Conford had become a beacon of hope among the oppressed. Mia nodded and began describing the island's power structure. Guided by me, she outlined 3 main factions. The first is led by an officer named Walter. His men are mostly remnants of defeated Plantagenet forces who stayed because they had nowhere else to go. They lack unity and motivation. The strongest faction is led by Baron Werner, she said with reverence. His family owned these lands and the Valaya Mountains. When the Selonians attacked, he retreated here, making this his stronghold. He has a dozen powerful knights and hundreds of well-equipped soldiers. He calls the shots. The last group, Mia added, is made up of northern refugees led by a down-on-his-luck knight named Klein. Most of my followers are displaced refugees without weapons or training. They are only useful for farm work and chores, not combat. Franz listened intently, synthesizing Mia's fragments with his own observations. A fragile, complex picture of a resistance alliance built on history, power, and survival emerged in his mind. Walter, Werner, Klein. Franz silently noted the three factions. These forces clearly had conflicting interests and internal tensions. Franz asked about supplies and patrols, but Mia's knowledge was limited to vague rumors, failing to reach core military intelligence. Realizing I had the essential info, I decided to find Ernst and depart. I'm done. Keep the money. I stood up to leave. As I reached for the curtain, a cold, thin hand grabbed my arm. I turned to see Mia, her eyes filled with a mix of fear, despair, and desperate courage. Trembling, she asked, "Sir, you haven't answered. Are you really from Confort?" In her line of work, prying into a guest's origin was dangerous and taboo. Yet, the hope of her homeland and a new port acted as her final straw. Seeing her burning desire, I hesitated. After a moment of internal struggle, I decided to reveal the truth. I whispered firmly, "Yes, we are from Confort. Confort, near your home of Ashbourne, has been rebuilt. It is stronger than ever, and the kingdom's army has returned." Mia's eyes widened in disbelief before tears streamed down her face. She collapsed to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably as if hearing a divine prophecy. I sighed, but duty demanded I leave. As I moved, Mia lunged, clutching my leg. "Sir, please, take me with you. Take me back to Confort. I'll do anything, laundry, farming, even as a lowly refugee. Please." I froze, seeing my own long-lost daughter in her face. A wave of sympathy hit me. Was my daughter suffering like this somewhere? Rationality warned me. Taking an unknown woman violated security protocols and risked the mission and Confort itself. Cold logic and loyalty to my lord ultimately outweighed my pity. I steeled myself and gently but firmly pulled my leg free. Stepping back, I said calmly, "Mia, I cannot take you." I watched the light die in her eyes. "But believe in Confort. Our Lord has an invincible army. They will march north and drive the Selonians out. Stay alive, live to see the northern frontier liberated. That day is coming soon." I turned and strode out without looking back. Mia remained on the cold floor, staring at the swaying curtain. The sudden loss threatened to consume her. Yet, my final words remained like a spark in her dead heart. She whispered the words like a mantra. "Confort, powerful lord. Invincible, drive out the Selonians." Her tears now held a glimmer of hope. Though still in hell, a crack of possibility had appeared. I exited the hut into the afternoon light. I spotted Ernst waiting by a dead tree, looking more composed. We approached each other, chatting casually while scanning for threats. "Any luck?" I whispered. Ernst nodded. "A refugee woman told me the soldiers are divided and hostile toward each other. The noble Werner's men are the most arrogant and well-fed, while the common soldiers and refugees suffer." "Same here," I replied. "Three factions, Walter, Werner, and Klein. Werner is the strongest, and they are divided." A familiar voice interrupted. "Hey, Mike, Jack, you boys are quick. That money was wasted." We instantly adopted relaxed expressions and turned. The old sailor approached, clapping us on the shoulders. I laughed. "You're the energetic one, old man. What's next? Let's go drink. It's the only decent thing in this hellhole." Ernst feigned surprise. "A tavern in this dump?" The old sailor leaned in, looking smug. "The commoners are poor, but the officers and generals aren't. Our caravan opened a tavern here to profit off them. Business is better than in Confort. These northern hillbillies pay double for ale and rum from the inner pass. Don't worry, I'll get you a fair price." I and Ernst exchanged looks. A tavern was the perfect place to gather intelligence. It was a hub of gossip where alcohol would loosen tongues and reveal the true state of the island's power structure. "Lead the way, then." Let's taste this island's fine wine. I smiled. Old Charlie laughed, ushering me and Ernst toward the higher ground of the shanty town. Ernst and I followed him through the filthy, narrow alleys. We climbed the muddy slope, leaving the stinking shanties behind. Franz sensed eyes tracking them from the shadows. He maintained his pace, scanning the surroundings with his peripheral vision without turning his head. Ernst caught my eye, signaling alert caution. Both had noticed, though the surveillance soon faded. Perhaps the stalkers dismissed them as mere merchants heading to the officer's tavern. I remained vigilant as the environment shifted. Armed soldiers in worn but functional leather and chainmail patrolled the area, exuding a battle-hardened aura. They eyed the newcomers with intense suspicion, creating a far more hostile atmosphere than the slums. This heightened security suggested something ominous was brewing on the island. The tavern, built of sturdy logs and stone, stood on a hillside. It was clearly reserved for officers and high-ranking soldiers. Old Charlie pushed open the door, hit by a wave of cheap ale, roasted meat, and sweat. The tavern was packed with rowdy, drinking soldiers. It was a stark contrast to the despair of the shanties below. Charlie led us to the bar where a stout, sharp-eyed man named Bob was cleaning mugs. Bob grinned at Charlie. Old Charlie, bringing new friends. Just showing these lads the ropes, Bob. The usual, 3 Alesh and your best roast, Charlie replied. Bob quickly obliged. I paid the internal rate, and we sat in a corner. I leaned back, scanning the room. The patrons were clearly officers, some wearing family crests. Their bodyguards, burly and fierce, sat nearby. These were clearly the core of Baron Werner's faction. A young waitress approached with our order. The merchants had clearly optimized their business model. The women navigated the room, enduring crude groping from the soldiers. They were accustomed to the behavior, as the tavern doubled as a brothel. I noted the stark class divide and the decadence of Werner's forces. I kept up the act, laughing and drinking with Charlie. Charlie gorged himself on meat and ale, clearly enjoying the excess. I feigned intoxication, my mind remaining sharp. As Charlie grew sloppy, Ernst kept the conversation flowing. I focused my attention on the surrounding chatter. Nearby, a Werner loyalist whispered, "Walter called up his men this afternoon. My friend, a guard for Lieutenant Drake, was emergency called. What is he planning?" A drunken companion scoffed. "Walter's lot aren't loyal to the Salonians anyway. They're just stragglers hiding out. Besides," the drunk added, "Werner controls the docks. They can't leave without ships. They're trapped." I realized the tension outside was due to an impending clash between Walter and Werner. The island was too small for such movements to remain secret. A civil conflict was imminent. I had arrived on the eve of a coup. This was a perfect opportunity to gauge the faction's strengths and weaknesses. I needed to gather intel while ensuring our survival. I signaled Ernst, who acknowledged the danger. Night fell, and the tavern grew dim. Charlie, mindful of the ship's curfew, decided to leave. "Time to go," Charlie hiccuped, "before they leave us behind." He finished his drink and stood up. Just as he rose, a sharp whistle pierced the night, followed by an explosion outside. The blast rocked the hillside. The tavern erupted in confusion as patrons looked toward the windows. Recognizing the sound as an attack, I tackled Ernst. "Get down." We dove under the heavy wooden table. The window shattered, and a hail of iron shot tore through the room. The sound of tearing flesh followed. Old Charlie was struck by the volley, his body riddled with holes as blood erupted from his chest. The shock of death replaced his drunken stupor as he collapsed, dead instantly. Nearby officers and guards were caught off guard, their screams and groans erupting instantly. Those near the windows were shredded by canister shot, while others were wounded or killed by iron pellets, turning the tavern into a slaughterhouse. Franz and Ernst, shielded by a heavy wooden table, narrowly survived the initial volley as the air filled with smoke and the stench of blood. "Quick, to the bar!" Franz roared. During the reload gap, they vaulted over the counter, pressing their backs against the sturdy liquor shelves. They had barely hidden when, boom, the tavern door was smashed open. Soldiers with fierce expressions rushed in, firing their hand cannons point-blank into the crowd. Bang! Bang! Guards attempting to draw swords were cut down by another round of canister shot. The attackers then used their empty guns as clubs, bludgeoning the wounded. More soldiers flooded in with arming swords, hand axes, and machetes, killing everyone in sight. The tavern descended into chaos. Drunken officers, unable to react, were slaughtered like lambs. Amidst the sound of breaking glass and dying screams, Franz and Ernst huddled behind the bar, listening to the sickening thuds of blades meeting flesh. Realizing they couldn't stay, they spotted a small door leading to the cellar or warehouse. "Staying here is suicide. Use the back door," Franz whispered. Seizing a moment of distraction, they bolted toward the small door. An attacker spotted them. "Two more over there. Don't let them escape." 3 men charged. Franz reached the door, but it was locked. Ernst kicked the lock, and the door swung open. They slipped inside and braced their shoulders against the door to hold it shut. The attackers pushed from the outside, the wood groaning under the pressure. Crack! A machete pierced the door, grazing Franz's cheek and slicing his hair. "Let go! Back!" Franz shouted. They pulled back simultaneously. The attackers stumbled into the warehouse as the door gave way. As the others prepared to charge, Franz and Ernst hurled heavy ceramic wine jars at them. The shattering jars and spilled liquid halted the attackers, leaving the lead man injured. "Go!" Franz pulled Ernst toward the far end of the warehouse. Navigating through barrels and debris, they found the exit and burst outside. The sight outside made them gasp. From the hillside to the harbor, countless torches moved like angry fire dragons. The air was filled with the sounds of battle as soldiers with uniform armbands assaulted the north. The harbor, "They've mobilized at least 1,000 men," Ernst said, his voice tight. Franz realized Walter's plan. It's Walter. His target isn't the tavern. It's the harbor. The harbor is the Iron Island's lifeline and only escape route. He's going all in. Controlling it secures his supplies and retreat. If Werner or Klein held it, Walter would be trapped if his coup failed. "We must leave immediately and get back to the ship," Franz decided. They had to bring this intelligence back to Confort. They began sneaking toward the docks under the cover of chaos. They slipped into a dense thicket, shaking off their pursuers. Backed against a tree, they caught their breath as the island's turmoil intensified. Whistles, horns, and drums signaled military orders across the island. More torches were lit, illuminating the battlefield. The pursuit had devolved into indiscriminate slaughter. Walter's soldiers began raiding the shanty town, killing civilians without mercy. A soldier with a bloody machete approached their thicket, grinning. "Die!" Franz threw a heavy wine bottle at the soldier's face. The bottle shattered on impact, blinding the soldier. "Finish him," Franz ordered. Ernst stepped forward, grabbed the soldier's machete, and struck him down. Franz searched the corpse, finding a functional arming sword. "I tested the weight. It felt right." "Take his armband," Franz said, pointing to the gray cloth identifying Walter's troops. Ernst tied the armbands on both of them. "This will make moving easier," Franz confirmed. The disguise worked. Other soldiers ignored them as they moved forward. The ruse bought them precious mobility. They headed toward the shanty town, the path to the docks. The closer they got, the more brutal the scene became. Burning shanties turned the night sky blood red. In the firelight, they saw countless figures locked in combat. Blades flashed, accompanied by screams and blood. Civilians fled in terror, only to be caught in the crossfire. The piercing screams were audible even from the base of the hill. Franz looked past the shanty town toward the distant harbor. Torches flared across the harbor, outnumbering Walter's forces and moving rapidly toward the hillside battlefield. "Werner or Klein's men?" Ernst whispered. Franz smiled coldly, realizing they had anticipated Walter's move. He analyzed that Walter's surprise attack had run straight into a trap. Werner and Klein would never surrender the strategic harbor. The Iron Islands had become a slaughterhouse. Walter sought escape, while his enemies moved to finish him off. Franz and Ernst had to carve a path to their ship to deliver their vital intelligence to Confort. "Move. We'll take the back alleys to the pier," Franz commanded, slipping into the shadows. Their only route lay through the chaotic shantytown. The shantytown was a hellscape of burning canvas and wood. Screams, roars, and the clash of steel filled the air. Desperate refugees fought blindly, while rebel army remnants looted and burned. The ground was slick with blood and corpses. Franz and Ernst, trained by the Intelligence Bureau, fought their way through with lethal efficiency. Their clothes were soon soaked in warm, viscous blood. After dispatching 2 thugs, the shanties thinned, and the salty breeze signaled the harbor's proximity. They sprinted toward the docks. Bloodied and ragged, they moved with the predatory focus of escaped panthers. Franz stumbled over a corpse, their fleet leader, who had clearly been killed after fleeing the officer's home. They had no time to grieve and pressed on. The sounds of heavy combat forced them to halt. The harbor was a battlefield, with hundreds fighting across the piers and warehouses. The ground was stained red with the blood of the fallen. Archers behind wooden crates rained arrows down on their targets. Franz recognized the commanding officer from their earlier fur trade. The battle for the harbor had reached its climax. Wait, Franz pulled Ernst into the shadows. Let them kill each other. They watched like predators. The officer's tactical superiority saw Walter's rebels systematically isolated and destroyed. Walter and his last personal guards were cornered in a fragile hut on the hillside. Trapped with no escape, they fought desperately from within. Their arrows took a heavy toll on the surrounding soldiers. The officer grew impatient as his men fell. Archers, use fire arrows. Burn that rat hole, he ordered. The archers ignited their oil-soaked arrows. Volleys of fire arrows struck the hut, turning the dry thatch into an inferno. Smoke and screams erupted from the burning structure. The heat became unbearable. Rebels stumbled out, engulfed in flames, only to collapse in agony. Kill them all, the officer commanded. His soldiers cut down the burning survivors without mercy. The hillside was littered with charred corpses. Franz and Ernst watched in silence, the air thick with the stench of burning flesh. Walter's defeat marked the end of the harbor battle. Franz realized the rebellion was collapsing. The guerrilla force had won. It was time to leave. Quick! Franz tore the rebel insignia from his shoulder. Ernst followed suit. They discarded the rags and hurried toward the docks. The guerrilla force was already securing the area. A patrol intercepted them, weapons drawn. Halt! Who goes there? The leader demanded. They were prime suspects for fleeing rebels. Before Franz could speak, the officer approached. Recognizing them from the trade, he waved his men back. Franz feigned relief and slipped several silver coins into the officer's hand. Officer, thank you. We're just merchants trapped here for days, waiting to leave. The officer felt the weight of the coins and nodded. He didn't fully believe them, but with the rebellion over, he was happy to take the bribe and clear them out. The harbor is closing for inspection. Leave now. He gestured toward the docks. Understood. Thank you. Franz and Ernst ran toward their ship. They scanned the chaotic berths for their vessel. Amidst the smoke and fire, they finally spotted their merchant ship. The merchant ship remained at its berth, sails half raised, as if waiting. Amidst burning vessels and floating debris, the pristine ship stood out like a sanctuary in the eye of a storm. The 2 men hurried across the swaying gangplank toward the vessel. Armed sailors guarding the gangplank raised their weapons as the blood-stained pair approached. It's us, Mike and Jack, Franz shouted. Recognizing them by the ship's lanterns, the sailors cleared the way. Quick, get on board. Franz and Ernst scrambled onto the deck, collapsing against the railing in relief. The atmosphere on deck was suffocatingly tense. With fires raging on the island and distant screams audible, the sailors watched the dark path to the pier with pale faces. Set sail? We're doomed if we stay, a panicked laborer cried, sparking a chorus of agreement. The first mate gripped the railing, teeth clenched. No, the captain hasn't returned. Abandoning the captain was a capital offense under the caravan's strict rules. Franz pushed through the crowd, his voice raspy. Don't wait. The captain is dead. I saw him killed in the officer's house. The first mate stared at him. Mike, are you certain? Absolutely, Franz replied, his face smeared with blood. He was riddled with holes. We're lucky to have escaped. Franz hadn't actually seen the captain die, only fall after being shot. But in this life-or-death moment, a definitive reason was needed to break the deadlock. The news of the captain's death was the final straw needed to force action. The first mate looked at Franz, then toward the encroaching fire and sounds of pursuit. His hesitation vanished. For these men, a plausible excuse to survive outweighed the truth. With the captain confirmed dead, departure became a necessary retreat rather than desertion. Damn it, the first mate roared. You heard him. The captain is dead. Raise the anchor, push off, and set the sails. Move. The order galvanized the crew into desperate action. Men shoved the ship away from the barge with long poles. Others cut the mooring lines as the heavy anchor was winched up. The sails unfurled, catching the night breeze like the wings of a waking giant. The ship began to pull away, its bow cutting through the dark water, leaving the burning coast behind. Yet, the escape was not peaceful. Desperate refugees swam toward the departing ship or clung to makeshift rafts. They reached out with pale, waterlogged hands, begging to be pulled aboard. The crew, expressionless, used bamboo poles to ruthlessly push them away to prevent the ship from being swamped. The refugees vanished into the waves. Franz and Ernst watched in silence, feeling a complex mix of emotions. They understood the crew's cold necessity. They had their own mission and could not risk the ship for strangers. Overcome by helplessness, the two turned to retreat into the cabin. This decision saved their lives. As they stepped inside, a shrill whistling sound tore through the air. Thwack, thwack, splat. Arrows slammed into wood and flesh. Through the doorway, they saw sailors on deck collapsing in pools of blood. Enemy attack, someone screamed. A relentless rain of arrows pelted the ship, some piercing the cabin walls and narrowly missing the two men. What's happening? Ernst crouched, furious and terrified. Franz peered through a gap in the splintered wood. Hundreds of torches lit the dark shore, revealing a mass of archers in distinctive leather armor. My heart sank. Solonians, I hissed. Ernst gasped. Solonians? Did that bastard Walter collude with them to hand over the Iron Islands? Looks like it, I replied. Walter failed, but these Solonians are trying to intercept any escaping ships. A heavy arrow suddenly pierced the gap, embedding itself in the wall exactly where my head had been. We stared at each other, shaken. Half a second slower, and I would have been killed. Despite the chaos on deck, the ship's rudder remained steady. The merchant ship continued to accelerate, slowly pulling away from the shore. The Solonian arrows fell short, eventually splashing harmlessly into the sea behind the stern. I and Ernst emerged to find the deck littered with corpses and wounded men being bandaged. Looking back, we saw the Solonian torches moving inland. The enemy had ceased their futile pursuit. Walter failed to escape to the Solonians, and they lacked the ships to invade the Iron Islands themselves, I analyzed calmly. The port was still burning, though the sounds of battle had died down. The slaughter was likely complete, with few survivors among the rebels or the innocent. Ernst remained trembling, still reeling from the narrow escape. Franz took a deep breath of the cold, blood-scented sea air, steadied his nerves, and returned to the helm to correct the ship's course. Regardless, they had survived and completed their mission. This intelligence regarding the Iron Islands' internal strife and the strength of various factions was invaluable to Conford. The salty sea breeze cooled the heat of battle on Franz's face. Suddenly, the face of Mia, the prostitute with the last glimmer of hope in her eyes, flashed into my mind. I wondered about her fate in that hellish, desperate shack. Had she survived the slaughter? Franz exhaled, burying the untimely sentiment. I was an intelligence officer, not a savior. My duty was to bring the truth back to Conford. Perhaps Conford's future actions could offer real hope to people like Mia. I hope you survive, I whispered, turning my focus back to the sea. The merchant ship caught the wind, sailing toward Conford through the dark, rolling waves. Inside the covert intelligence department warehouse at Conford Castle, flickering candlelight cast shadows of I and Richter against the stone walls. Richter stood by a wooden table, reporting the intelligence Franz and Ernst had risked their lives to retrieve. His voice was steady but hurried, signaling the urgency of the situation. My lord, we have confirmed 3 armed factions on the Iron Islands. Richter pointed to a sketch. The strongest is the remnants of Baron Werner's northern frontier garrison, about 500 well-equipped men controlling the ports. The second is Knight Klein's militia of 1,000 refugees, lacking training. The third, led by the officer Walter, staged a rebellion but has been wiped out. Richter's tone grew grave. Crucially, Franz found signs of Solonians acting as reinforcements for Walter. Franz overheard that Walter had colluded with the Solonians to seize the islands. Fortunately, Werner and Klein were alert and suppressed the rebellion. Walter was executed. Currently, the Solonians lack the naval capacity to launch a direct invasion against the weakened islands. I listened, fingers tapping the table, eyes locked on the map. I asked the core question. So, the Solonians intend to strike the Iron Islands? The intent is clear, Richter nodded. Franz saw Solonian ships. Given the rebellion, an attack is highly probable. Furthermore, they have spent a year utilizing captured Plantagenet shipwrights. They likely possess the capacity to build landing craft. Richter added, the Iron Islands have been a thorn in Harold's side since they seized his coastal outposts, and he surely harbors a grudge. Moreover, the tens of thousands of northern frontier captives they seized last year have significantly bolstered their labor and war potential. They are now capable of a massive amphibious assault. The islands, with fewer than 2,000 soldiers, cannot hold. I nodded, my gaze fixed on the Iron Islands marker on the map. Last year, the islands tied down 5,000 to 10,000 Solonian troops, preventing a full-scale siege of Conford and harassing their supply lines. Though they acted for themselves, they objectively relieved immense pressure on us. I turned to Richter. Beyond us, they are the only organized resistance left in the northern frontier. We are two sparks in the dark, dependent on each other. If our enemy burns our neighbor, we cannot sit idle. If the islands fall, Conford is next. Richter asked, my lord, do you intend to support them? We must. Direct intervention is impossible due to our limited naval power, but we can provide other aid. My mind raced. First, intelligence sharing. Warn Baron Werner and Knight Klein of the Solonian movements. Second, material aid. Send captured weapons, arrows, and medicine via Grimm's merchant ships. Most importantly, strategic diversion. I pointed to Conford. Once they attack the islands, we will launch large-scale raids on the northern frontier, attacking their supply lines and threatening their rear. We must force Harold to split his forces. Let them know that attacking the islands means being stabbed in the back by us. Understood. Richter replied, energized. I will arrange the messengers and increase border reconnaissance immediately. Richter hurried out into the shadows. I stood still, then ordered my guards, summoned Brendan, Roland, Steward Edgar, and Mr. Hans for a meeting. As the guards left, I studied the map, frowning. I was puzzled by Harold's recent reaction to my cavalry raids. Given the Solonians' brutal nature, they should have retaliated with fury. Instead, they were shrinking their defensive lines. Daily, Leon and Thorstein's cavalry brought back loot, grain, livestock, and rescued Plantagenet slaves. Captured Solonian soldiers were sent to the Corvée labor squad to work the mines. I understood Harold's restraint. Harold wanted to avoid a two-front war, intending to crush the Iron Islands first to secure his rear before dealing with Conford. He thinks he can succeed, but I will not allow it. Heavy footsteps approached the warehouse. Commanders Brendan and Roland, Steward Edgar, and Treasurer Hans entered, dusty from their duties. They saluted and sat, waiting for my command. I went straight to the point. I have summoned you because of intelligence that will dictate our future strategy. I summarized the rebellion on the Iron Islands and the impending Solonian threat. A brief silence followed, with Brendan and Roland looking visibly shocked. They were stunned by the internal rebellion and the prospect of a Solonian amphibious invasion. The situation in the northern frontier had just become significantly more complex. They were stunned by the speed and reach of my intelligence gathering. They had assumed Richter's Intelligence Bureau was limited to border reconnaissance and counter-espionage. They hadn't realized Richter's reach extended to the Iron Islands, uncovering secret rebellions and Solonian invasion plans. Such capability far exceeded their understanding of scouts, appearing both mysterious and highly efficient. Brendan asked bluntly, "My lord, is this intelligence reliable? How did Richter obtain such detailed information?" Realizing I might have overstepped, I added, "I only mean that this is too critical to risk any errors." I didn't reveal the Bureau's methods, but assured them, the source is reliable. One of Richter's best agents risked his life to bring this back, and it has been verified. I turned serious. Harold is playing defense not out of fear, but to secure his rear by taking the Iron Islands first. If the Iron Islands fall, the Solonians will consolidate their power and attack us with full force, creating a far more dire situation than the last siege. Roland agreed. The Iron Islands currently draw their pressure away from us. We cannot sit idle, but cross-sea warfare is beyond our current capabilities. Edgar added, our own reconstruction and defense needs are already straining our supplies and manpower. Sending troops directly is unrealistic. I pointed to the map, tracing the border between Conford and Solon. We lack a navy, but we can support them another way. We launch an offensive on land to disrupt Harold's deployment, preventing him from gathering his forces to invade the Iron Islands. All eyes followed my finger. I stopped at a narrow strip connecting the southwest peninsula to the mainland, Tyrol, marked near Mirror Lake. Mirror Lake was where Heinrich I defeated the Solonian ancestors a century ago, securing the northern frontier. My target is Tyrol, I declared firmly. The veteran commanders immediately grasped the strategic significance. Tyrol, Brendan noted, is the throat connecting the peninsula to the mainland. Controlling it means holding the entire southwest peninsula. Roland added, without a navy, this is the only land route. Neither we nor the Solonians have the capacity for large-scale amphibious operations. I nodded. Exactly. Count Rockefort's North Wind squad succeeded previously because they bypassed the Solonian front lines. Harold realized this weakness after his retreat. He has since forced slaves to build fortresses, trenches, and arrow towers at Tyrol, turning it into a permanent forward base to lock us out of the southwest. My gaze hardened. The Solonians want to trap Conford in this corner. Now is the time to break that lock. Harold is focused on the Iron Islands. The garrison at Tyrol is likely not at full strength, and their fortifications may be incomplete. We can strike now. Taking Tyrol opens the door to the entire southwest peninsula and grants us strategic initiative. First, we remove the direct threat to our southwest and expand our defensive buffer. Second, we control the land route, improving our security and future maritime links to France City. Third, and most importantly, I said, we light a fire in Harold's backyard. If he ignores us to attack the Iron Islands, we can use the peninsula to receive refugees, ships, and resistance forces, bolstering our future potential. Taking Tyrol is essential for Conford's survival and growth. We must win this. I turned to my military commander. Brendan, report on our current military status. Brendan stood, ready with his records. Our main legion, consisting of the 1st and 2nd regiments, has finished training. We have 2,500 combat-ready troops with high morale. Additionally, our 3 fortified settlements have 900 militia members. I will order 10 days of intensive training to ensure they can coordinate in battle. Finally, we have 2,000 able-bodied refugees who have worked on our construction and water projects. They are disciplined and fit. They can serve as logistics and support troops or as reserves to replace frontline losses. I calculated 5,400 total personnel, a formidable force. Tyrol has only been held for 6 months. They cannot assemble a field legion to stop us without pulling troops from their Iron Islands invasion force. Even if we fail to take Tyrol, forcing Harold to divert troops will relieve the pressure on the Iron Islands, achieving our strategic goal. As the discussion intensified, a cautious voice brought them back to reality. It was Hans, the finance officer, holding a thick ledger. My lord, colleagues, Hans cleared his throat. Military action is vital, but we must plan the logistics and finances first. War requires increased pay, especially for the militia transitioning to external combat. We must ensure their wages are sufficient to maintain morale. I estimated the costs. A month-long northern campaign will require an extra 2,000 silver coins for military pay, plus 20,000 kilograms of grain for the 10,000-strong force. This excludes miscellaneous costs like flintlock muskets, uniforms, maintenance, medicine, and fodder, I added. The civil budget will face significant pressure. All eyes turned to Edgar, the steward sitting to my left, who had been silently taking notes. Though responsibilities were divided in Conford, Edgar was the trusted core figure who coordinated and finalized all financial decisions. Edgar calmly set down his quill and consulted his ledger on material reserves. Sir, Edgar replied steadily, Hans's concerns are valid, but our current reserves and tax revenue can sustain a month-long medium-scale campaign. He added firmly, This fight for our survival and the removal of northern threats is necessary. The civil administration will ensure supplies remain uninterrupted. Relieved, I looked pleased by the confirmation. I addressed the group. Edgar is right. This operation is vital for Conford's development, not just for lifting the siege on the Iron Islands. I pointed to the map, tracing the Solon-controlled lands north of Conford. Victory will expel the Solonians from the southwest peninsula. We will gain vast territory, ports, and, most importantly, strategic depth. Furthermore, the spoils of war, weapons, supplies, and potential captives will bolster our strength. My tone turned sharp as I addressed my commanders, Brendan and Roland. But this requires a decisive, crushing victory. We must hurt Harold and make a statement. Therefore, I ordered, by tomorrow night, I want detailed maps of the Tyrol region distributed to every company commander, along with preliminary operational plans. I turned to Edgar and Hans. Prepare the logistics immediately. Once the scouts report back, we must be ready to march at a moment's notice. Yes, sir, the officers replied, dispersing to begin their preparations. Alone, I pondered. Such a significant offensive, which could alter the regional power balance, could not be launched without informing Count Rochefort. It was a matter of military coordination, political loyalty, and trust. I needed to present my plan to the Count personally to secure his support and, ideally, additional aid. I left the castle with my guards and rode toward France City along the newly improved road. This north-south trade route had become the Northern Territory's golden artery, bustling with constant traffic. Once a rugged path, it was now a wide, busy thoroughfare filled with merchants, livestock, and the sounds of commerce. The prosperity had encouraged locals to build taverns and inns along the route. These stops provided warmth, food, and a place for merchants to exchange news. The inns offered clean rooms and fodder, solving the logistical challenges of long-distance travel. With services like medical supplies and winter gear available, the route thrived, bringing life to previously desolate areas. Troops from Conford and France City had conducted thorough sweeps of the surrounding forests. They eliminated bandit strongholds, restoring order through strict discipline and force. Regular patrols and outposts were established to ensure safety. The route was now a safe, well-traveled path. Merchants no longer feared raids, allowing trade to flourish. Thanks to the improved road, I reached the walls of France City by evening, having cut travel time significantly. Upon arriving at the governor's mansion, I was told the Count was unavailable and was asked to wait in the reception room. After half an hour, the office door opened. Count Rochefort emerged, looking refreshed and wearing a casual robe, as if he had just bathed. I stood and bowed, immediately understanding the situation. The Count had likely been with a mistress, perhaps Lady Isla, the wife of the merchant Grimm. This was an open secret in high society, though I kept my thoughts to myself. Carl, the Count said, looking surprised but in good spirits. He invited me into his office, sat back with a glass of wine, and asked, "You're a rare visitor at this hour. Is there an emergency in Conford?" I bowed apologetically. "Apologies for the intrusion, my lord, but I have urgent military intelligence that requires your attention." The Count straightened up, his expression turning serious. "Oh? Tell me." I detailed my recent counteroffensive on the northern border, explaining how I had exploited the Solonians' distracted main force to strike their vulnerable border outposts. We targeted smaller, weakly defended Solon villages and outposts, I explained. Our goal wasn't occupation, but destruction, burning their supplies and barracks, and neutralizing their garrisons. I emphasized the speed of the operation, noting that we struck and withdrew before the enemy could react. While the results weren't glorious, this move signaled to the Solonians, especially Harold, that Conford is no longer passive and possesses the resolve to strike back. I then shifted to the most critical topic, Harold's reaction. What's baffling is Harold's response. Given the Solonians' vengeful nature, they should have launched a severe retaliatory strike against Conford to make an example of us. Instead, Harold actually pulled back his defensive lines on the northern border. I detailed the movement. He abandoned several contested outposts, withdrawing his forces by over 10 kilometers. This expanded our operational space, a retreat completely contrary to Harold's aggressive character and Solonian military doctrine. Count Rochefort listened, his expression shifting from focus to unconcealed shock. His surprise stemmed from two things: the speed of my recovery and counteroffensive. The Count remembered that just 6 months ago, Conford was barely holding on under Solonian assault. Now, my ability to organize effective offensives and my command presence far exceeded the Count's expectations. Even more shocking was Harold's uncharacteristic, weak response. A Solonian retreat in the face of provocation defied everything the Count knew about Harold. Frowning, the Count tapped his chair, murmuring, "Impossible. Harold is not one to swallow such insults. There must be another reason." Seeing I had captured the Count's attention, cut to the core. "You're right. Harold isn't afraid of my meager counterattacks. He is exercising restraint because he has a far larger, more important target to focus on." "What is it?" The Count leaned forward. I took a breath and stated clearly, "The Iron Islands." "The Iron Islands?" Count Rochefort gasped in disbelief. This was far beyond his guesses. I then concisely summarized the intelligence brought back by Franz and Ernst. I covered the 3 factions on the islands: Walter's rebellion and collusion with the Solonians, the suppression by Werner and Klein, and the looming Solonian threat along the coast. The Count leaned back, his fingers tapping the armrest in visible astonishment. He mused, "Since becoming governor of the Northern Territory, my energy has been focused on defending France City, with only limited counterattacks against Solon. I knew of the resistance on the Iron Islands, but across the sea, without ports or ships, I was powerless to help beyond aiding the occasional refugee." He looked at me with newfound appreciation. "I didn't expect you to not only stabilize Conford, but also establish a channel to the Iron Islands and gather such detailed intelligence. That is no small feat." I remained calm, revealing only enough. To counter Solonian infiltration, I established a small intelligence department in Conford. We were fortunate this time. I kept the details of my core organization secret. Conford currently enjoyed enough autonomy that I only needed to report major matters to the commander-in-chief. The Count nodded, skipping the details of the intelligence unit to focus on strategy. "Intelligence is key. So, what is your view on the crisis at the Iron Islands? What do you intend to do?" I stood tall. "We must support the Iron Islands. Their existence is vital to the strategic balance of the entire Northern Territory." The Count gestured for me to continue. I presented my core plan. "Since we lack the naval power to project force directly, I plan to attack what they must save. I intend to mobilize Conford's main legion and launch a powerful land offensive against a weak point in the Solonian-controlled zone. We will target Tyrol, or at least seize a few outposts, or conduct a large-scale armed reconnaissance to cause enough chaos and threat. I want Harold to realize that not only is his backyard on fire, but his front line is also in trouble." I looked at the Count. Harold will face a dilemma: continue diverting precious troops to cross the sea to attack the Iron Islands, or deal with us. Either way, the pressure on the Iron Islands will be greatly relieved. That is my plan. The Count watched me, his deep eyes reflecting a complex internal calculation. The study fell into silence, save for the crackling fireplace. Finally, the Count spoke, his tone steady. "Karl, your plan is bold and courageous." He shifted, asking an intrusive question. "Tell me, how many troops do you have at your disposal?" This touched upon a lord's most sensitive secret. Such a direct inquiry was rare. But given their relationship, superior, future father-in-law, and close allies, the Count felt entitled to ask. I decided to be honest. Currently, Conford's main legion has 2,500 well-equipped soldiers. Additionally, there are 600 trained militia, and we can mobilize thousands of refugees as auxiliary soldiers for logistics and construction if needed. The Count's weary but sharp eyes flashed with genuine surprise and approval. He leaned back, re-evaluating the young, battle-hardened lord before him. After a moment, he nodded solemnly. "In such a short time, after such a brutal siege, and with the Northern Territory in ruins, you have rebuilt your forces and morale from the ashes of Conford. Karl, you have done far better than I imagined. This resilience is rare." The praise was sincere. The Count knew how difficult it was to rebuild a fighting force after such devastation. My achievement far exceeded his initial expectations. However, As the supreme military commander of the Northern Territory, the Count's mind immediately turned to practical, critical concerns. Count Rochefort leaned forward, his expression turning serious. What is the strength of Harold's forces in Tyrol, and what is the status of his fortifications? This is critical for our next move. I replied immediately. Based on repeated reports from our scouts and interrogations of prisoners, Harold has about 2,000 standing Solon warriors in Tyrol. They are using 3,000 refugees and surrendered locals to build walls, clear roads, and cultivate land for a long-term occupation. In total, there are about 5,000 people, but only the 2,000 Solon warriors are combat-ready. Tyrol is strategically important but isolated, separated from the Solon core by dense forests, making their supply lines fragile. Harold's strategic focus lies elsewhere. He cannot afford to commit significant elite forces to this isolated outpost. I pointed to the map. More importantly, their fortress is barely started. The foundations are laid, but the walls are low, and the towers and bastions are non-existent. They have no real defense. They are at their most vulnerable. I urged, if we wait 6 months to a year, their defenses will be complete. Removing this thorn then will cost us dearly, if it's even possible. The window of opportunity is closing, Count. Now is the time to strike. Count Rochefort studied the map, lost in thought. He weighed my analysis. The enemy was weak, unentrenched, and isolated. It was a rare opportunity. The risks were present, but the potential gains were immense. Finally, the Count nodded firmly. Your analysis is sound. The opportunity outweighs the risks. I approve the operation. We must strike while they are vulnerable to boost our morale. What support do you need from France City? I shook my head. Thank you, Count. I came primarily to report our plan and seek your approval. Confort has sufficient forces for this targeted strike. We are confident in our own strength. Our only weakness is a lack of cavalry. We lack warhorses and trained riders. However, since this is a siege and clearing operation rather than open field combat, our reliance on cavalry is limited. The Solonians also lack cavalry. If France City could provide some, it would greatly enhance our mobility for reconnaissance and pursuit. The Count agreed immediately. I will handle the cavalry. It will be useful in the open terrain of Tyrol. I will assign 1,000 elite cavalry from France City to your command for this operation. You will determine the strategy and timing, but the cavalry will be led by my own officers. The Count smiled meaningfully. Of course, if you can convince my officers to follow your lead in the heat of battle, I won't interfere. This gave me a chance to seize actual command. The Count added sternly, my only requirement is that you prioritize the safety of the troops, especially my reinforcements. Do not risk a disastrous defeat. Bring them back safely. Do you understand? Yes. Thank you for your trust, Count. Confort will not fail you. I declared. With the military details settled, the map was rolled up. I should have left immediately to return to Confort. Time was of the essence. Yet, I remained seated, as if anchored to my chair. I stared at the light from the desk lamp, fidgeting with my clothes. The Count noticed, leaning back and slowly refilling his pipe. A heavy silence filled the office. Only the crackle of the fireplace and the rustle of tobacco broke the stillness. The air felt thick with unspoken tension. After a long minute, I finally broke the silence. I looked up, my voice hesitant. Count. Charlotte. How is she? I gripped my knees, bracing myself. The Count paused, looking at me with a complex expression of scrutiny and sympathy. He lit his pipe, letting smoke drift between them. She is well, the Count said calmly. She has more freedom in the Huanum fief. You need not worry. He added firmly. She knows of your feelings, and she is happy. A flicker of hope lit up my eyes, and my shoulders relaxed. Then, the Count's next words extinguished that hope. However, the Count stated flatly, she does not wish to see you right now. My eyes dimmed, a wave of disappointment washing over me. I looked away, bowing my head. After a moment, I forced a bitter smile. I understand. Given our current situation, it is indeed inconvenient for us to meet. Both men knew exactly what that situation implied. My marriage to the princess created an insurmountable wall between me and Charlotte. Count Rochefort nodded vaguely, responding only with, "It is good that you understand." The conversation hit a dead end, leaving a suffocating silence between them. Any attempt to find a new topic felt futile. They exchanged dry, meaningless pleasantries about France City's weather and municipal projects just to fill the awkward void. The office air felt stagnant. Outside, the night was dark, save for the lonely lights of the watchtowers. I realized staying longer only increased the awkwardness. I stood up abruptly, my movements hurried. "Count, it is late and the situation is urgent. I must return to Conford tonight to deploy," I said, eager to leave. Rochefort stood, nodding formally. "Travel safely. I entrust the Tyrol matter to you. I will not fail you," I promised, rushing out and disappearing into the corridor. The Count watched me mount my horse and vanish into the night. The Count's smile faded into a look of worry as he sighed. One's environment dictates their style. I, young and rising from the ruins of Conford, operated with a do-or-die mentality. I favored military risks and gambles. This style could yield massive results with minimal cost. Yet, a single loss could be fatal. As governor of the northern province, the Count's decisions affected thousands and the kingdom's last foothold. He had to be steady, favoring non-defeat over risky maneuvers. While stable, his caution risked missing opportunities. I was gambling again, this time with 1,000 elite cavalry. The Count commanded 30,000 troops, excluding levies. He could have provided overwhelming force to ensure success. Instead, he only granted 1,000 elite cavalry. He feared giving me too much power would fuel my ambition. My bold, adventurous nature was evident. Excessive force might lead me to deviate from the plan. A larger force deep in the northern wasteland could easily become a trapped beast in a Solonian ambush. 1,000 cavalry was enough for harassment and reconnaissance, but not for a strategic gamble, forcing me to rely on tactics rather than brute force. Furthermore, the Count needed a safety net for the northern frontier. He viewed these cavalry as a test, a spark to ignite the plains. Success would relieve pressure on France City. Failure would require the Count to have reserves ready to stabilize the supply line and prevent a total collapse. These troops were also bait to probe Solonian intentions. Politically, my status as the king's brother-in-law meant my success or failure would draw the royal capital's scrutiny. Giving too many troops would make the Count responsible for any disastrous loss. A loss of only 1,000 was a manageable tactical failure. Conversely, if I succeeded, the Count would share the glory with minimal risk. Despite these calculations, the Count felt a flicker of genuine anticipation. I was like a comet, repeatedly turning desperate situations into victories. From Conford to France City, could this unconventional youth tear open the stalemate in the north? This mix of worry and hope kept the Count restless. Suddenly, soft hands massaged his tense shoulders. The scent of cooling ointment eased his muscles. The Count relaxed, a faint smile appearing. A refined, feminine fragrance filled the air. It was Lady Isla, wife of the merchant Grimm, who had been keeping him company. "What is it, Governor?" Isla asked softly. "Still thinking of that young Carl? You seem particularly concerned about him." Her words hit the mark. The Count leaned back, enjoying the massage. "He is my sharpest sword and the North's hope. I must care." He patted her hand. "It's cold, let's go inside." He turned and wrapped his arm around her waist, her warmth dispelling the corridor's chill. With her by his side, his worries felt distant. Isla smiled knowingly. "The governor's office is for work, it's stifling. Let's go inside where it's warm." The Count agreed, leading her toward the warmth of his private quarters. Under Isla's gentle care, his anxieties regarding my plan were temporarily set aside. For this night, he allowed himself a respite from the burdens of command. The war and the reckless youth would have to be left to time and fate. My party returned to Carnford Castle in the dead of night. The castle was silent, with only a few torches flickering on the watchtowers. Despite the fatigue, I was exhilarated, mentally simulating the upcoming operation. I wanted to wake Brendan and Roland, but seeing the dark castle, I restrained myself. Waking everyone now would only cause panic, I reasoned. Such a major announcement requires a formal, clear-headed setting. I dismounted, handed the reins to a groom, and walked into the castle hall. The hall was dimly lit by oil lamps. Sleepy maids rose from their stools, bowing respectfully. "My lord, you're back. We'll prepare hot water for your bath immediately," one maid offered. I waved a hand, my tone weary but gentle. No need. It's too late. Everyone go rest. Tomorrow morning will suffice. Not wanting to disturb their rest, I handed my dusty cloak to a maid and climbed the stairs alone. In the washroom, I splashed cold water on my face by moonlight, the chill sharpening my senses and calming my restlessness. I passed the guest room, deciding not to disturb my mother, who slept lightly. I pushed open the master bedroom door with extreme caution. The room was dark and silent, save for the steady breathing of Princess Louise, who was already asleep. I silently removed my outer clothes and boots, preparing to climb into bed. "You are back?" a sleepy, muffled female voice asked from the bedside. Startled by the movement, Louise sat up, her silhouette visible in the dark. I lowered my voice. "Yes, I'm back. Sorry to wake you. Why are you still awake?" Louise rubbed her eyes. "I had some insomnia, but it's fine." She paused, her tone naturally concerned. "I thought you'd stay in France City. You haven't bathed or eaten. Shall I call the servants?" Her habitual, aristocratic concern caught me off guard in the darkness. The contrast between my political turmoil and this domestic care felt surreal. "Thank you, but no," I said, my voice softening. "I'm not hungry, just tired. Let's sleep. Don't trouble the servants." "Are you sure?" "It's no trouble," Louise persisted. I smiled, my expression losing its usual formality. "Really, it's fine. Go back to sleep." Fearing she would insist, I gently pressed her shoulders, guiding her back down to the bed. Louise complied, and I lay down on the other side, returning the room to silence. They lay back to back, maintaining a distance that felt like an invisible boundary. The room remained quiet, their breathing intertwined. I lay awake, the day's political tensions settling, yet Louise's simple questions rippled through my mind. Her words, "You haven't bathed, and have you eaten?" echoed in the dark. They were mundane, yet carried the weight of genuine marital concern. This sense of returning home to warmth and care softened my heart, which had grown cold under the pressures of power and war. It gave the cold stone castle a sense of home. Yet, another figure immediately surfaced in my mind. Charlotte. A sharp pang of guilt pierced my chest. I imagined Charlotte would have done the same, perhaps even more effectively. With her decisive nature, she wouldn't have asked. She would have simply ordered the servants and scolded me for my exhaustion. I would have surrendered to her control, a feeling I once deeply cherished. But Charlotte was not here. Princess Louise was. I felt guilty for comparing them and for my wavering heart, viewing it as a betrayal of both Charlotte and the Count. Yet, I was human, and I was weary. After endless scheming and warfare, I craved a harbor to drop my guard. This bed, with the princess's warmth, became my subconscious refuge. Beside me, Louise was also wide awake, staring at the moonlight and realizing she had grown accustomed to my presence. During my night in France City, she had felt profound anxiety and fear. It surprised her, as she had lived alone in the royal capital for years without issue. Yet, in the short time at Confort, she had lost the ability to sleep alone. The silence of the dark felt threatening. Only when I returned, my warmth and scent, leather, dust, and man, filling the space, did she feel anchored. My presence was more comforting than any incense. She realized she was becoming dependent on me, a thought that terrified her. "Henry," she whispered internally, a wave of guilt washing over her. She felt she was betraying their childhood bond and the hope of his return. The conflict between her reliance on me and her loyalty to Henry tore at her. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and she drifted into an uneasy sleep. Sensing the change in her breathing, I sighed, a sound lost in the night. I pushed aside my thoughts and finally fell asleep as dawn approached. When I awoke, the sun was bright. It was nearly noon. I rubbed my temples, noting how often I had been sleeping in since my marriage. I recalled the early days of rebuilding Confort, when I worked from dawn until midnight. Despite my current, more complex duties, I could no longer maintain that pace. Is this good or bad? I wondered, staring at the ceiling with self-mockery. Perhaps comfort and companionship dulled one's edge? I noticed Louise was still asleep, which surprised me. This was a departure from her rigid, royal upbringing. It seemed she had slept as poorly as I had. Sharing this lazy morning strangely eased my self-criticism, replacing it with a sense of peace. However, I was not a man built for leisure. Remembering the day's military meeting, I carefully sat up, trying not to wake her. Louise stirred, her eyelashes fluttering as she woke up in a daze. "Are you getting up?" she asked, her voice raspy. She sat up, adding, "I'm sorry. I should have woken you earlier." "It's fine," I replied calmly. "This isn't something you need to worry about. Rest a bit longer." I didn't want the princess involved in the territory's military and political affairs. The two rose and straightened their sleep-wrinkled pajamas. My hair was disheveled with stubble on my chin. Louise looked equally tired. They walked out of the bedroom in their pajamas. In the second-floor living room, Lady Irene sat by the window, sipping tea and reading a novel. Morning sunlight bathed her in a serene glow. Seeing her son and daughter-in-law emerge in such a state, she smiled with amusement. "How rare," Lady Irene teased, eyeing Louise. "Our princess, famous for her strict schedule in the capital, is sleeping in? It seems I am a bad influence." Louise blushed, explaining, "It's not my fault. I just didn't sleep well." I simply ruffled my hair and smiled faintly. I headed to the washroom to splash my face with cold water, followed by Louise. Lady Irene watched them, smiling as she told a maid to prepare a late breakfast. Soon, I and Louise, now dressed, sat at the dining table. They ate a simple meal of bread, eggs, sausages, and berries, a combination of breakfast and lunch. They ate in a quiet, yet not awkward, silence. Last night's emotional turmoil had subtly bridged the gap between them. I finished quickly, nodded to my mother and Louise, and left. I ordered my guards to summon all key officials for an emergency meeting, but avoided the Lord's Hall. The hall was once ideal for secret meetings. Now, with the arrival of my mother and the princess, the hall was constantly occupied by servants. I prioritized absolute discretion for my plans. I chose the intelligence department's secluded, old warehouse instead. Brendan, Roland, and Edgar arrived shortly. Leon and Thorstein had returned yesterday from their sabotage mission, while Richter was absent, scouting Tyrol. The warehouse was cramped, with everyone crowding around a table covered in a map of the Northern Territory. Candlelight cast flickering shadows on their grim faces. I stood at the head of the table, surveying my subordinates. Present were Brendan, Roland, Edgar, Maul, Leon, and Thorstein. I cut straight to the point. "Leon, Thorstein, report on your northern raid." Leon stood up, looking exhausted but exhilarated. He pulled out a parchment. "Lord, we spent 8 days 30 kilometers deep into Solonian territory. We destroyed 7 fortified villages and 3 outposts. We killed about 500 Solonian soldiers and captured 2,000 auxiliaries. We rescued over 5,000 Plantagenet citizens held as slaves. They are currently at the border awaiting your orders. We seized 200 horses, hundreds of livestock, and supplies enough to sustain our border troops for half a month. We lost 2 men, with 3 severely wounded and 5 lightly injured." I nodded. "Excellent work. You've boosted morale and disrupted the enemy. Sit down." Leon sat. I addressed the room. "As you know, we are launching an offensive against the Solonians. We are going to strike." Leon and Thorstein showed no surprise. They were the core of the Carnford army. They had already sensed the impending war through the increased activity and equipment distribution. They sat straighter, eyes burning with the desire for battle. I was satisfied with their readiness. "Our target is Tyrol," I said, pointing to the map. "Brendan will brief you on the strategic importance later. Here are your tasks. We have over 4,000 troops, including our main force and 1,000 elite cavalry from Count Rochefort. We have a 2-to-1 advantage over the Solonian garrison. However, do not be arrogant. The Solonians have mostly infantry in Tyrol, but we must prepare for the worst. We cannot afford to be complacent. If Solonian cavalry appears on our flanks during our assault, it could cause chaos." I stared at Leon and Thorstein. "Your task is to command all cavalry, including the Count's reinforcements. Your duty is to act as a shield. Protect our flanks and rear. Stop any enemy cavalry at all costs. If you see an opening, destroy them. Remember, the final victory in Tyrol depends on our infantry's urban warfare. Your job is to create a safe environment for them." "Understood. Understood, my lord." Leon and Thorstein replied in unison, their voices ringing with determination. I then revealed the key to their success. Count Rockefort has pledged his full support, providing 3,000 elite infantry and 1,000 cavalry to bolster our ranks. The news stunned the commanders. Brendan and Roland's eyes lit up with excitement. With such reinforcements, their chances of victory and their deterrent power had increased exponentially. At dawn, Peter woke to the familiar sounds of the settlement, water being drawn, wood being chopped, and livestock stirring. His militia company was off duty today, so he dressed in his clean, patched clothes, ready for the day. He planned to tend his fields and clear the silt from the nearby irrigation ditch. The ditch, dug by the refugees under the settlement chief's direction, was vital for irrigation. Maintenance was the responsibility of each household for the section bordering their land. Edgar, the steward, mandated that large-scale repairs only occurred during the off-season. Peter knew the inspectors were strict. Poor maintenance would lead to penalties for both the household and the settlement chief. A reprimanded chief would inevitably make life difficult for the tenants, potentially even revoking their land. Everyone understood that the land belonged to me. They were merely granted usage rights, a grace they dared not squander. Peter recalled the tragedy of his past. His father, a veteran, served at a border outpost in the Plantagenet Kingdom. 3 years ago, a Solon cavalry raid killed his father and the other veterans. The news shattered their world. To make matters worse, the kingdom's officials ignored their pleas, and the promised pension never arrived. His mother, Peter, his sister, and his younger brother struggled to survive on a few acres of poor land. His youngest brother, Daniel, had no interest in farming. Obsessed with engineering and shipbuilding, he failed the royal capital's entrance exams 3 times. Merged with 26057, Peter saw his brother's sketches and wooden models as useless toys. They were only good for selling to neighbors for a few copper coins. His mother, however, doted on Daniel, shielding him from farm labor. The burden fell entirely on Peter and his sister. When their old horse died last winter, farming became impossible. Desperate, they heard of the new territory, Conford, which offered land to refugees. The family packed their meager belongings and joined the exodus. Life in Conford was initially harsh. Peter worked hard in the camps, eventually earning 10 acres of land under the new settlement policy. Miraculously, Daniel passed the apprenticeship exam for the workshops. Now, Daniel was a promising apprentice to a master shipwright in Amber Bay. His monthly wage of 3 silver coins became their family's lifeline. They finally moved from the shanty town into a sturdy stone-in-wood house in Fort No. 3. His mother now boasted of Daniel's success, proud of his technical skills. Life was improving daily. Peter splashed his face with cold water, pushing aside the heavy memories. He started a fire in the kitchen to prepare breakfast. He retrieved a hard, brick-like black bread, baked in the settlement's communal oven. To save firewood, the settlement baked in large batches every few days, distributing bread based on the flour each family contributed. Though coarse, the bread was durable and served as their primary ration. Peter sliced the bread, toasted it on the iron stove, and stored the rest. He then boiled oats with water and salt. This simple meal was typical for most Conford subjects. His sister, Amina, and their mother soon joined him. Amina smiled, smelling the toasted bread. They ate in silence. Amina broke the quiet, suggesting they raise chickens or ducks now that life was stable. She dreamed of having fresh eggs daily. Their mother agreed, suggesting they also buy lambs in the autumn. She noted that goat milk would be good for Daniel, who was working hard in the workshop. The mention of Daniel pierced Amina's excitement. Her smile vanished, and she stared silently into her porridge. She felt a surge of resentment. She disliked Daniel, remembering how she and Peter had toiled in the fields after their father's death. While they suffered, Daniel had remained locked away with his useless drawings and models, never helping with the family's burdens. Daniel's eccentric knowledge eventually landed him an apprenticeship at the workshop in Conford. The high wages improved the family's life, and initially, Amina was proud. However, Daniel visits only twice a month, staying briefly like a guest, his demeanor distant and impatient, treating home like a mere transit point. To his credit, he sends almost all his wages home, keeping very little for himself. Now, even the prospect of raising livestock, which Amina proposed, seems destined to benefit Daniel primarily, leaving her deeply resentful. She had hoped her labor would contribute to the family or earn her some savings, but that hope is now overshadowed. The breakfast atmosphere turned stifling. Peter sighed internally, noting his sister's dejection and their mother's habitual favoritism toward Daniel. He opened his mouth to intervene, but chose to focus on his meal instead. The tension was broken by the rhythmic shouting and marching of the militia training outside. Peter remained silent, continuing to eat as the sounds of other companies' drilling drifted in. Their mother turned to Peter, her tone both concerned and urging. "Peter, why aren't you at training today? Don't be lazy." Peter swallowed his bread and replied calmly, "It's my company's rest day, Mother." Relieved, she nonetheless nagged. "Militia training is serious business. You get 10 silver coins each time. Don't look down on it. It adds up." She dreamed aloud. "If we save enough, we can build a bigger, brighter house in the Tunbeo or somewhere even better." Her voice softened with longing. "I've always dreamed of living in Amber Bay by the sea, hearing the waves every morning." She circled back to her youngest son. "Daniel works in Amber Bay now. Lord, I will surely develop that place into something great. We could buy land next to Daniel's workshop. He's a respectable man now. He shouldn't be cramped in with us when he brings colleagues home or starts a family." She patted Peter's arm, urging him to be clever and obedient to his superiors in the militia. She whispered excitedly. Mrs. Anna said her son was picked for the main legion. 2 silver coins a month plus rations. If only you could get in. Peter felt a complex mix of emotions. He understood his mother's expectations and the family's burdens, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. After a few seconds of silence, he sighed softly and replied, "I understand, Mother. I will." Breakfast ended in a heavy silence. Their mother left for the market to learn about animal husbandry, driven by the desire to improve conditions for Daniel. Her obsession with creating a better life for her youngest son eclipsed everything else. Peter and Amina took their tools and headed to their field on the outskirts of the Tunbeo. The morning streets were already bustling. Peter exchanged nods with neighbors and fellow militiamen along the way. He found himself distracted by the well-dressed merchants and officials from the south. Comparing their fine cotton and wool clothing to his own patched, old cotton jacket, he felt a pang of inferiority. Though the jacket kept him warm in the northern frontier, it looked shabby compared to the others. Amina, meanwhile, watched the young daughters of wealthy craftsmen with envy. Those girls, dressed in clean, fine linen, radiated a lightness and ease that Amina had never known. She tugged at her faded, coarse-cloth dress, her spirits sinking as they reached their field. Their land followed the 4-field crop rotation, divided into rye, barley, clover/alfalfa for fodder, and turnips/radishes. This method maximized land use and soil fertility. It was summer, so the work was limited to weeding and harvesting the first batch of clover and alfalfa. These greens were meant for livestock, but the family had spent all their savings on their stone house and couldn't afford animals. Consequently, they used the crops as green manure to fix nitrogen in the soil. As Amina weeded, she watched a neighbor grazing sheep on fallow land with envy. The neighbor collected fresh sheep dung, a valuable fertilizer, while her flock grazed. Seeing that cycle of crops-livestock fertilizer made Amina feel bitter about their own situation. Peter tried to comfort her. "Don't envy them. They live in wooden shacks. We have a sturdy 2-story stone house." His words backfired. Amina retorted, "What good is a stone house if it's reserved for Daniel's future wedding? It's not mine. If I had sheep, at least the wool and milk would be mine to control." Peter was stunned by her outburst. Before he could respond, Amina continued, her voice choked with tears. "The house was built with his wages anyway. It's his house. Once he marries, he'll probably kick us out. He's a respectable man in Amber Bay now. He looks down on us dirt grubbers. Mother only cares about him anyway." Seeing his sister's teary, stubborn face, Peter felt a sharp pang of pain. He loved her dearly. He dropped his hoe and said softly, "Amina, don't say that. Daniel's work in the shipyard is demanding. He's just busy. He's always been quiet and reserved, not intentionally distant. He sends his wages home because he cares. Without his money, we wouldn't have moved from the shanty to this stone house. We must be grateful." Amina was reasonable and understood the truth in his words. Yet, The deep-seated hurt from years of being overlooked remained difficult to soothe. Amina sniffled, suppressed her complaints, and returned to weeding with increased intensity, as if venting her grievances on the weeds. Seeing her mood stabilize, Peter sighed in relief and turned to clear his section of the irrigation ditch. He shoveled out the silt, sweating profusely. After 2 hours of silent labor, the siblings finished their farm work. As the sun climbed, they sat under a tree to drink from their water skins. Peter wiped his sweat and looked toward Amber Bay, noting that Daniel was due to return for his break soon. He told Amina he would urge Daniel to visit home more often and care for the family. Amina was skeptical, muttering that Daniel likely looked down on them now that his horizons had broadened. She sighed, and they packed their tools to head back to the Tunbeo for lunch. Just as they stood up, a deep, piercing horn blast echoed from the center of the settlement. The sound shattered the midday silence, carrying an imposing, invisible force. Peter sprang up instantly, his fatigue replaced by a soldier's instinctual alertness. "It's the assembly horn," he shouted to Amina. "The militia battalion is being called up. Go home. Tell Mother I have an emergency mission and don't know when I'll return." Without waiting for a response, Peter sprinted toward the military camp. Amina stood stunned, still holding the water jug. The horn continued to blare, growing more urgent and striking fear into everyone's hearts. She watched as men from nearby fields dropped their tools and raced toward the camp. Only women, the elderly, and children remained, leaving Amina gripped by unprecedented panic. She looked at the settlement, which suddenly felt less like a safe haven and more like a place of imminent danger. "Peter," she whispered, her voice drowned out by the horns and footsteps. Abandoning their tools, she clutched the jug and ran toward home. Her only thought was to find their mother. Peter, despite his earlier labor, ran swiftly thanks to his militia training. He raced along the paths, overtaking slower men, and burst into the militia camp. The grounds were filling up, with officers standing on a high platform, looking grim. Peter quickly located his unit's banner, fell into formation, and struggled to catch his breath. Behind him, other soldiers arrived in a chaotic scramble. Minutes later, the horn finally ceased. Sergeants immediately descended on the latecomers, pinning them down and administering military justice on the spot. The sound of heavy staves striking flesh echoed through the camp, leaving the rest of the soldiers trembling. Each received 50 lashes before being helped back into line, shamed and in pain. The iron discipline cast a heavy pall over the camp. A limping, formidable officer strode to the front. Peter recognized him, their company commander and chief instructor, Oliver. A veteran of the brutal defense of Conford, Oliver had survived the legendary battle against the Solonians but was left with a permanent limp, leading to his reassignment to the militia. Known for his explosive temper, Oliver was notoriously harsh on recruits. Yet, Peter deeply admired him. The scars and the aura of slaughter he carried were symbols of true strength. Oliver scanned the silent ranks with a cold, blade-like gaze and roared, his voice grating and powerful. "Listen up. I'll say this once. We are going to war. Real, life-or-death combat. We're fighting the Solonians." A collective gasp rippled through the ranks, but no one dared speak. "All forces in Conford are mobilized," Oliver continued. "The Lord has ordered intensive training for you greenhorns over the next few days. You'll learn to march and form up with the main legion. Learn to coordinate with the artillery so you don't get blown up by your own side, and learn to hold your ground against cavalry charges. The better you train, the better your chances of survival. Though, in my eyes, you're all just cannon fodder right now." He offered a brutal, pragmatic truth. This training wasn't to make them heroes, but to help them breathe a little longer on the battlefield. "You have half a day. Go home, settle your affairs, and be back here by 8 p.m. Anyone late gets executed." "Understood, sir," the soldiers shouted in a ragged, fearful chorus. "Dismissed," Oliver roared, limping away. The ranks broke, and the soldiers hurried home, filled with anxiety and a hint of adrenaline. Peter stood still, taking a deep breath. Oliver's harsh words had snapped him into reality. War had arrived. He hurried home, determined to put his affairs in order. Peter pushed open his door, his breath still ragged. He was shocked to find Amina, his mother, and his brother Daniel, who had unexpectedly returned. The table was laden with a feast far beyond their usual black bread and oatmeal, including meat soup and seafood from Amber Bay. It was a special meal prepared for Daniel's return. Amina rushed to him, grabbing his arm with tears in her eyes. "Brother, what was that horn? You ran off so fast, you scared me." Peter looked at her, took a breath, and said calmly, "War is coming. We've been ordered to fight the Solonians." "Fighting the Solonians?" Amina's eyes widened in terror. "How? Isn't that the main legion's job? You're just militia. You're supposed to patrol or guard caravans, not fight." She gripped Peter's arm, her nails digging in as tears streamed down her face. Their father's death haunted her. She couldn't bear to lose her brother to the same fate. Peter felt a sharp pang in his heart. He patted her head gently. "Don't be afraid, Amina. It'll be fine. We won't necessarily be on the front lines." Daniel, who had been silent, stood up, his usual cold detachment replaced by gravity. "Brother, are you really going to war against the Solonians?" he asked earnestly. Peter nodded solemnly. "Yes. The Lord ordered intensive training for all units to support the main legion. I have to stay at the barracks now." Daniel opened his mouth to speak, but lacking the words for emotion, he simply nodded. His awkwardness felt genuine. Their mother emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Peter repeated the news, and his mother turned pale with worry. Though she favored her younger son, she loved her eldest deeply. The news of the front lines cast a heavy shadow over the house. The four sat in silence, unable to eat their meal. Peter broke the silence. "I have to report to the barracks this afternoon. I won't be back until the fighting ends." His mother's eyes reddened, and Amina began to sob. "Don't worry," Peter said, trying to sound light. "Militia might not see the front, and the pay has increased to 1 silver coin a month. You can't choose to avoid the front once you're there," his mother choked out. "Swords have no eyes." Amina cried, "Brother, let's leave. We don't need this house or land. Let's go home and farm our old fields." She believed leaving Conford was the only way to keep him safe. Peter shook his head firmly. "We have nothing left there. We have a life here now, food, a house, land. It's the Lord's grace. Besides, desertion means execution." Daniel looked up suddenly. "Brother, be careful on the road." He added, "I'll come home every day after my shift at the workshop." The family stared at him in shock. His mother looked surprised, Amina disbelieving, and Peter deeply moved. Daniel blushed, feeling the weight of their gazes. He looked away, his tone stiff. "Don't look at me like that. With you gone, it's not safe for Mom and Amina in the Tunbeo alone. Besides," he added, "the workshop in Amber Bay is only a few kilometers away. It's an easy walk." His awkward explanation melted the ice in Amina's heart. She stared at her brother, who was finally stepping up to take responsibility. Despite past grievances, she felt a surge of warmth and sadness. Peter was deeply touched. He smiled, nodding. "Good. I can rest easy knowing you're looking after them, Daniel." The atmosphere shifted, a sense of unity forming amidst the gloom of war. After the meal, his mother and sister began packing his gear. They packed their best clothes in a bag full of black bread, dried meat, and cheese. His mother wept as she gave instructions, while Amina silently filled his water skin and added dried fruit. The small bag was heavy with their love and fear. His mother held his hand. Amina bit her lip to stay quiet, and Daniel watched from a distance. "Mom, Amina, Daniel, take care," Peter said, forcing a steady voice. He turned away, unable to look at their tears, and stepped into the street to join the flow of soldiers. The door closed behind him. Peter looked at the gloomy sky over Conford, determined to protect his home and land. Peter joined the crowd of soldiers heading toward the barracks. The air was filled with the sounds of weeping and heavy footsteps. Officials tried to calm the families, but the fear remained. Peter waved once and marched toward the center of the Tunbeo. At the barracks, the atmosphere was strictly professional. Every single militia member had arrived. Their lives and families were tied to this land. Desertion was not an option. The Tunbeo leaders checked the rosters and equipment with the main legion officers. Captain Oliver, cold and stern, signed off on the final intake. The process was efficient and grim. Once finished, a young man in a crisp uniform, looking both strange and vaguely familiar, stepped onto the wooden platform. Peter recognized the speaker as Tommy, the propaganda officer who had previously addressed the public during the execution of Solon's spies. Tommy stood on the platform, scanning the nervous militia ranks. "Brothers, I'm Tommy from the propaganda team. We're gathering for urgent pre-battle training because we're going to kill the Solonians." His blunt declaration stirred the crowd. Tommy continued, "I know you have questions. It's because of the Iron Islands in the Northern Sea. Our Plantagenet comrades are fighting there, wreaking havoc behind enemy lines and taking the heat for us." He gestured passionately. "Now, the Solonians are massing to crush the Iron Islands. If your neighbor's house is on fire, can you just watch it spread to your own?" "No," the soldiers roared, finally grasping the urgency of the situation. Tommy pressed on. "If the Iron Islands fall, Conford is next. You know the Solonians. They kill, loot, and burn everything. Do we want to see our homes destroyed and our families suffer again?" "No, never," the crowd shouted. Many soldiers, including Peter, moved to tears. Tommy's words ignited their shared trauma and deep-seated hatred. "We won't sit and wait. We'll strike first and defend our homes." Tommy cried, "Kill the barbarians. Defend our home." The camp erupted, morale peaking. Peter clenched his fists, feeling every word. For Peter, the Solonians were the murderers of his father. He was fueled by a desire for vengeance and protection. Tommy concluded his speech at the perfect moment. Oliver limped onto the platform, his cold gaze silencing the crowd. "Shut up. We are now the 3rd Militia Battalion, merging with the 1st and 2nd to form the 1st Militia Regiment. You aren't farmers anymore, you're soldiers." He barked, "Get to your new barracks and start training immediately." As the troops moved, Peter looked back toward the settlement one last time. He saw his mother and sister crying, while his brother, Daniel, stood still, locking eyes with him and offering an encouraging nod. Peter took a deep breath, turned away, and joined the flow of the army. He felt a mix of tension and duty, driven by a newfound, resolute determination. Meanwhile, I, the supreme commander of Conford, faced immense pressure. Previously, I had only fought from behind the safety of Conford's walls. I had relied on firearms and terrain to win, but this time was different. This would be my first large-scale offensive field battle. Without walls, the army's discipline and my own command would be tested to the limit. A defeat would mean the destruction of everything I had built. 3 days later, a disciplined cavalry unit arrived at Conford. It was a 1,000-strong force of the Northern Iron Cavalry, the elite of the Franz City Count. I was relieved to see Sir Kalen leading them. I realized the Count had sent a trusted veteran to ensure the success of my risky plan. The Count had chosen someone I already trusted, facilitating better cooperation. Kalen was far more likely to support my plan than a stranger. I felt heartened by this support and went out to greet them. "Sir Kalen, welcome to Conford." I smiled. Kalen dismounted and clapped me on the shoulder. "Lord Carl, it's been a while. You've come a long way since you were barely holding off the Solonians last winter." He looked at the organized camp and the training recruits with admiration. "Who would have thought you'd be ready to take the offensive in less than a year?" "It's thanks to my men and the Count's support," I replied modestly. "Let me have Edgar prepare food and quarters for your men." Kalen waved me off. "No rest yet. Let's discuss the situation and your plan." I led Kalen and his corps officers to the hidden command post. They gathered around a large map of the region. I pointed to a spot in the northwest, Tyrol. "Our target is Tyrol," I explained. "They've only held it for 6 months. They want to turn it into a dagger at our throat, but their defenses are incomplete. This is our only window of opportunity. Their fortifications are currently at their weakest. If we wait a few months for them to finish the walls, the cost of taking it will multiply. We must crush them before they harden their defenses." Kalen nodded, fully grasping the urgency. "What is my role and the role of my cavalry in this assault?" Kalen asked. I replied, "Tyrol is far from their core, so they lack heavy cavalry. They rely on infantry, which is our advantage. However, we cannot be careless. Their cavalry is fast and mobile. If we get bogged down in a siege, their cavalry could strike our flanks from the Black Forest or the valley." I looked Kalen in the eye. "Your mission is vital. Your cavalry will be our mobile reserve and flank guard. Once the campaign begins, your troops must remain vigilant. deploying scouts widely to monitor our flanks and rear for any enemy approach. If the Solon cavalry attempts to ambush our weak points during the decisive battle against the Tyrol garrison, your troops must act as a steel barrier to intercept them. Prevent them from charging our infantry at all costs, and if the opportunity arises, seek to annihilate the enemy cavalry using local superiority. Sir Kalen leaned over the map, his sharp gaze tracing the roads, forests, and rivers around Tyrol as he mentally simulated potential cavalry engagements. Accepting the deployment without hesitation, he replied, "It is my duty. Rest assured, Lord Karl, my cavalry will fully support the main infantry force. I will personally lead the patrols to secure our flanks. No Solon horse shall break our formation." "Excellent. Your word gives me great confidence," I said, pleased by Sir Kalen's decisiveness. My tone shifted to a grave, commanding register. "However, Sir Kalen, we must prepare for the worst. War offers no guarantees, and this operation carries significant risk." I looked at Kalen candidly. "Count Rockefort surely told you that while he granted me command, he set one bottom line. You and your 1,000 elite cavalry from France City must return safely. I trust you understand his intent." I continued solemnly. "As Supreme Commander, I issue this order. If the situation deteriorates, if our infantry offensive fails and enemy reinforcements arrive to encircle us, you must prioritize the preservation of your cavalry. Do not engage in futile sacrifice. Use your mobility to withdraw from the battlefield and return to France City." Sir Kalen frowned, clearly offended. "How can you say that? I have joined your battle sequence. My men and I are soldiers of the Carnford army, your comrades in arms. Abandoning comrades in the heat of battle is a knight's disgrace and an indelible stain. The Count would never forgive such cowardice." His tone grew passionate, fueled by confidence in the plan. "Your strategy is clear, your assessment of the enemy is accurate, and the timing is perfect. This is no blind gamble, but a well-considered offensive. I believe that under your command, we shall prevail." Sir Kalen looked up, his eyes burning with resolve. "Lord Karl, the plan is sound. I and my 1,000 cavalry will follow your orders, standing and dying with our Carnford comrades. Give the command,